Loud.
From his hometown of Duluth in Minnesota, one of those questioning critics of the official version of events is Professor James Fetzer.
The resurgence of interest in the death of JFK had repercussions when Congress passed the JFK Records Act in 1992 that created a 5-civilian-member board entrusted with the responsibility to review and declassify documents that were held by the CIA, the Secret Service, the Office of Naval Intelligence, and so forth. We know from its own report that it had some significant failures. For example, and the Secret Service, which deliberately destroyed motorcade records that would have revealed that the motorcade in Dallas was a travesty, a violation of at least 15 different Secret Service policies for presidential protection. This behavior on their part raises the most serious and disturbing questions about their complicity in the entire affair.
From the moment he arrived in Dallas, the president's protection was suspect, according to Vince Palamara, a Secret Service expert.
There was last-minute changes invoked by the Secret Service involving President Kennedy's security. Specifically, agents were told not to ride on or near the rear of the limousine. Now, these orders were funneled from the Assistant Special Agent in charge of the White House detail, who was the planner of the Texas trip, Floyd Boring, to one of his assistants, a shift leader by the name of Emory Roberts, who was in charge of the follow-up car. You can see an agent, Henry Ribka, doing his normal duty, jogging besides the limousine, when in the follow-up car, you can see Emory Roberts stand up and wave him back, and you can see a very perplexed Agent Ribka waving his arms in the air several times in seeming disgust. There was another last-minute change made at Love Field, invoked by the Secret Service. The Dallas Police Department motorcycle outriders were told not to be beside the car. It went from 4 to 6 down to a measly 2 riders on each side. And to add insult to injury, they were pushed further back in the motorcade by those agents not being by the car, by those motorcycle officers not being in their position. It opened up President Kennedy to a field of fire from in front and from the rear.
In the months before the trip to Texas, there had been a growing number of threats against the president's life.
Despite the increase in conspiratorial activity in the month of November 1963, in the apparent red alert the Secret Service appears to be under in response to this activity, the agency acts in the opposite fashion and actually reduces the security and acts like no threats on the president's life are occurring. Why?
Uniquely on that day in Dallas, the press, the camera crews, Kennedy's military aide, who would normally sit in the front of the president's car, and even his personal physician were all relegated to the rear of the motorcade by the Secret Service.
In a conventional motorcade, the president would be somewhere in the middle, surrounded by security and the press. In this case, the presidential limousine was set right out in front of every other limousine, which of course is the reason why the Secret Service destroyed the records of its own motorcades when they were asked for them by the Assassination Records Review Board.
The most suspicious behavior by shift leader Emory Roberts was to be at the time of the shooting in Dealey Plaza.
Tragically, he actually ordered the agents not to move during the heart of the shooting. Agent Sam Kinney, who drove the follow-up car, admitted as much to me and told me, quote, exactly right, end quote. And all these deficiencies begin and end with the Secret Service because they were the prime movers. They were the ones who were directing the security arrangements from Washington up to and including in the heart of Dallas during security meetings. They were the ones that gave out assignments, vetoed or approved of security arrangements, so the buck stops with them.
At Parkland Hospital after the president's death, the media were reporting that the fatal shots had come from in front of the presidential.
Getting ready to wave at the president. So
you were down under the viaduct, so to speak, weren't you?
We were halfway in between
on the grass,
triple underpass. We were at the curb when the incident happened. But the president's car was some 50 feet still yet. In front of us coming towards us, and we heard the first shot, and the president, I don't know who was hit first, but the president jumped up in his seat, and I thought it scared him. I thought it was a firecracker, because he looked, you know, fear. And then as the car got directly in front of us, well, a gunshot apparently from behind us hit the president in the side, side of the temple.
Do you think the first gunshot came from behind you too?
I think it came from the same location. Apparently back up on the mall. I don't know what you call it.
For the benefit of nomenclature, all you folks have gone out under the viaduct, and as you turn, going under the viaduct on the left-hand side, there's some grass. Do you think the shot came from up on top of the viaduct toward the president? Is that correct?
Yes, sir. Not on the viaduct itself, but up on top of the hill, a little mound of ground there, the garden.
How far away would you say that is from where the president was? A couple of 300 yards, something like that?
Well,
shooting took place today. Dallas is off to your left. This is Main Street. This is the county courthouse and the jailhouse in this block here. This is the triple underpass that we have referred to. This is where President Kennedy, Johnson, and as I understand it now, a Secret Service man was shot at about, Conley was shot at approximately 12:35 today. And from our eyewitness that you saw earlier, was shot from up in here. This is an overpass going over these streets. We call it our triple underpass because there's another one, was shot from here.
Nigel Turner from England, he interviewed me for like 16 hours, and I got 3.5 minutes, that's it. But there was a big conference in 2003 at Duquesne University, and it's like 1,500 people there, and most of the participants were there, and we all were talking like, you got 16 hours too? Yeah, he did it all, he did synthesize. I was like, okay, at least he did good, like a Cliff Notes version of everything at that time. And I was grateful for him to get the rights to that footage of that one Agent Henry Ripka being recalled by Henry Roberts. That was WFAA TV in Dallas-Fort Worth. It was their ABC affiliate, and he had to get the rights and clearances to that. That was shown on, it was a 1988 documentary. James Earl Jones did the voiceover. It's called The Day the Nation Cried. You can get it in any video store. It was all just about JFK's life. It was G-rated, no controversy. And they were showing that back in 1991. I happened to see them. What is that? That never saw that before. And then just the rest is history. I mean, that was one of the keystones, touchstones to my original research, or the springboard for me interviewing these guys. I guess how I like to work is, it sounds like it's the way Tom likes to work, a kind of a combination of structured notes and structured things, and kind of like loose and formal. And I just think it a little. This is the first part. I don't need jokes for. I'm 40 years old, born in June of '66, and how I got interested in this was basically almost by accident. My parents, big Kennedy lovers, and just growing up, they were Democrats too, and just had an interest like anybody else, just reading things, over the counter. But when I was dating myself now in middle school, there was the House Select Committee reinvestigated Kennedy assassination in the late '70s. So I got interested in more then. Still, obviously, nothing original at that point. And then what really hit me was the 25th anniversary in 1988. And this went crazy. Videotaped every program on TV. There were so many retrospectives in 1988. And still didn't do anything original. I had a big interest, and so does, thousands, if not millions of people around the world in one form or another. But not only John F. Kennedy, the man, but the mystery behind his murder and so forth. And I guess parallel to all this, of all things, the 1960s fictional show, The Wild Wild West. It was that bad Will Smith movie in 1999, but the original series is better. It's like the fictional depiction of the Secret Service of the 19th century. So I had sort of an interest in the Secret Service, the kind of parallel, again, Kennedy thing. And so I started to look at certain things with the actions, and like to call the inactions of the Secret Service. And again, you start to notice some things. And I always like to throw this caveat. Just want to state something for the record, even though I do believe that there was some form of conspiracy involved in Kennedy's death. I am not saying the Secret Service, did it, so to speak. And I think 95, 99% of these guys were, for lack of a better term, squeaky clean. There's different levels. I mean, there's negligence. You can be innocent but negligent. You're grossly negligent. There are, admittedly, 2 or 3 agents that I am a little bit more suspicious of, just from my research and whatnot. But and again, I tried to stay as much away from theories as possible. In fact, how this all began was, I guess, well, I don't want to get ahead of myself too much. I tell you what, before I actually get into the heart and soul of my research, what I like to do is, I think it's a very good aside, is to kind of get into President Kennedy. This I am going to read from my prepared notes here. We all have a natural tendency to think of President Kennedy and his tragic assassination as ancient history. I mean, we're talking the early 60s, and although many millions of people all over the world remember JFK and his tragic death, they obviously all would have to be at least in their late 40s. They're talking maybe 5 years old and up, you know. And for many young people in particular, President Kennedy is merely JFK, like a pop culture symbol like Elvis Presley and Marilyn Monroe, or just the dude on the $50, you know. And we just all remember that no matter what your politics and your views on history of this man, his death changed the course of history. Without his untimely passing, there would be no Vice President Johnson to take over his presidency, the subsequent landslide election in his own right, which is largely a tribute to Kennedy. There'd be no Nixon in Watergate, and the scandal of Watergate. No Ford, who just recently passed away, to replace him. No Jimmy Carter, no Reagan, no George Bush I, probably no Clinton, and certainly no George Bush without his father having been vice president for 8 years and president in his own right for 4 years. And again, this isn't to be maudlin or exaggerate. I mean, any way you slice it, no matter all the criticism about President Kennedy through the years, he literally saved the world from nuclear destruction in World War III via his handling of the Cuban Missile Crisis in October '62. The whole thing about that, I don't get too much into the size. My parents were newlyweds. And well, they got married in August of '62, and they were scared to death, like a lot of people at the time, thinking, is this going to be the end of the world? You know, we have these offensive missiles in Cuba. And even President Kennedy's harshest critics have said that he was brilliant what he did in the Cuban Missile Crisis, and definitely averted. All the hawks and the Joint Chiefs wanted him to invade Cuba and, you know, take out the offensive weapons, and that just had a domino effect. And we're all sitting here today. The reason why we're breathing the air is because of President Kennedy. I mean, there's no way to put it. It's not an exaggeration. And again, this for the domino effect of the presidents and the opportunities for some of the political figures that were dead in the water, like Nixon, to become president through his death. And yeah, so basically, just to wrap up this part of my prepared notes, before looking at the mystery of his killing in any depth, we need to humanize President Kennedy once again. Make him transform from merely JFK, that dude who was killed years ago, I'm talking vernacular, perhaps even before our parents were born, at least out of diapers, to the charismatic, witty, charming, often sometimes funny statesman he really was. After all, there is a reason that, despite barely 3 years in office, he still rates in public opinion polls and even some historical polls ahead of such luminaries like FDR, Lincoln, and Washington. And even the harshest presidential historians still say he was at least the above average in that mark. You consider all the presidents we've had. That's an accomplishment for not even 3 years. And likewise, and again, I thought it would be appropriate to contrast President Kennedy with his arch nemesis, Richard Nixon. Nixon was Eisenhower's vice president for 8 years and just barely lost to Kennedy in 1960. And because of his death, he was able to become president in 1968 and served from January '69 until his fall from grace in August of '74 because of Watergate. So it's a 20-minute DVD. Just before we get into the details and arcane, minutia of JFK's death and my particular slant on things, I just want to kind of humanize JFK and show a little contrast between President Kennedy and also with President Nixon. Okay. One of the other DVDs I'm going to show, I'm going to talk over it. This one, I'm just going to talk for themselves.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for coming today. How are you? Thanks very much. Thank you very much. Great to see you, Mr. Ronnie. You were on you'll be back today. I see you. Thanks. I'll tell you. I'll tell you. I got your vote? Yep.
Never heard or seen such outrageous distorted reporting in 27 years of public life. I'm not blaming anybody for that. Perhaps what happened is that what we did brought it about, and therefore the media decided that they would have to take that particular on. But when people are pounded night after night with that kind of frantic, hysterical reporting, it naturally shakes their confidence. And yet, don't get the impression that you arouse my anger. You see, one can only be angry with those he respects. Don't get the impression that you arouse my anger. You see, one can only be angry with those he respects.
The Republican National Committee recently adopted a resolution saying you were pretty much a failure. I'm sure it was passed unanimously.
By his third year in office, Kennedy had established a bond with the American people through television. He was the first president to host live televised press conferences and quickly mastered the format. He held 64 during his presidency, an average of one every 2 weeks.
The end of this summer of 1963 will be an especially critical time for 400,000...
As many as 65 million Americans watched each one. They saw a man who was not only knowledgeable, but quick on his feet and quick-witted.
Supporters of your trade expansion bill feel that you have misjudged the implications of your decision to raise the carpet and glass tariffs. There have been 7 cases by the Tariff Commission that have come to my desk as president. In the case of 3 of them, I believe, they were by a split decision. 4 of them were unanimous, 2 were accepted by me, and 2 were rejected. Now, in this case...
Underneath it all was this really almost quasi-intellectual approach in which he knew, he read history, he read biography, he read events, and he had humor. Let me tell you, humor takes you just a long, long way in this world.
His use of spontaneous humor endeared him to the viewers. One example came in November of 1961. While giving a press conference, he received word that the U.S. had successfully launched a chimpanzee into space.
I guess this chimpanzee who was flying in space took off at 10:08. He reports that everything is perfect and working well.
He liked those press conferences, and he knew he was good at it. Time and time again, you could see his mind working. You could see that while the question was being asked, you could see, I thought I could see in him formulating the answer, and then when he got it right, he'd smile.
Excuse me, Ms. Montgomery.
Mr. President, I wonder if you could tell us whether, if you had it to do over again, you would work for the presidency, and whether you can recommend the job to others.
Well, the answer is, the first is yes, and the second is no. I don't recommend it to others. At least for a while.
Mr. President, the Democratic platform in which you ran for election promises to work for equal rights for women, including equal pay. What have you done for the women according to the promises of the platform?
Well, I'm sure we haven't done enough, and I must say I am a strong believer in equal pay for equal work, and I think that we ought to do better than we're doing, and I'm glad that you reminded me of it, Mr. President.
Mr. President, your attorneys have taken what is seen as the narrow view on impeachment, saying that impeachment should be limited to very serious crimes committed in one's official capacity. And my question is, would you consider the crimes returned in the indictments last week, those of perjury, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy, to be impeachable crimes if they did apply to you?
Well, I've also quit beating my wife. Of course, perjury is a serious crime. Of course, the crime of obstruction of justice is a serious crime and would be an impeachable offense. And I do not expect that the House committee will find that the President is guilty of any of these crimes to which you have referred. When you refer to a narrow view of what is an impeachable crime, I would say that might leave in the minds of some of our viewers and listeners a connotation of which would be inaccurate. It's the constitutional view. The Constitution is very precise. Even Senator Ervin agrees that view is the right one. And if Senator Ervin agrees, it must be the right one.
This is a rather remarkable letter about the tapes. If you notice, the president says he's heard the tapes, or some of them, and they sustain his position. But he says he's not going to let anybody else hear them, or fear they might form a different conclusion. I deeply regret that this situation is
one of your hobbies. Well, I have done a lot of fishing, off and on through the years. Some down off Florida some time ago, and during our honeymoon we went to Mexico and I fished down there. That's the dirtiest lot. We better just.
Who reminds me of the symbol of his body, the circus elephant, his head full of ivory, a long memory and no vision, and you have seen elephants being led around the circus ring. They grab the tail of the elephant in front of them.
Can you imagine if this country elects a Democratic House and a Democratic Senate and elects Dick Nixon, Republican President of the United States? And then Lyndon Johnson and Sam Rayburn go over to meet with him as the leader of the Congress and sit down with Dick Nixon, who in 1952 said Adlai Stevenson had a degree from the Cowardly College of Containment. In 1954 called Truman a traitor. In 1960 called me a liar. In 1960 called Lyndon an ignoramus. Lyndon says he called me one. No, I say he called Lyndon one. He called me rash, improved, reckless, naive, and uninformed, but he called Lyndon an ignoramus.
I can only say that my experience is there for the people to consider. Senator Kennedy's is there for the people to consider. As he pointed out, we came to the Congress in the same year. His experience has been different from mine. Mine has been in the executive branch. His has been in the legislative branch. I would say that the people now have the opportunity to evaluate his as against mine, and I think both he and I are going to abide by.
Question to Vice President Nixon from Mr. Van Oken.
Mr. Vice President, since the question of executive leadership is a very important campaign issue, I'd like to follow Mr. Novin's question. Now, Republican campaign slogans, you see them on signs around the country as we did last week, say, it's experience that counts. That's over a picture of yourself, sir. Implying that you've had more governmental, executive decision-making experience than your opponent. Now, in his news conference on August 24th, President Eisenhower was asked to give one example of a major idea of yours that he adopted. His reply was, and I'm quoting, "If you give me a week, I might think of one. I don't remember." Now, that was a month ago, sir, and the President hasn't brought it up since. And I'm wondering, sir, if you can clarify which version is correct, the one put out by Republican campaign leaders or the one put out by President Eisenhower?
Well, I would suggest, Mr. Van Oker, that if you know the President, that was probably a facetious remark. I would also suggest that insofar as his statement is concerned, that I think it would be improper for the President of the United States to disclose the instances in which members of his official family had made recommendations.
The only hot war we've got running at the moment is, of course, the one in Vietnam, and we've got our difficulties there, quite obviously.
I don't think that unless a greater effort is made by the government to win popular support, that the war can be won out there. In the final analysis, it's their war. They're the ones who have to win it or lose it. We can help them, we can give them equipment, we can send our men out there as advisors, but they have to win it, the people of Vietnam.
Heute ist der stolzeste Satz, den jemand in der freien Welt sagen kann: Ich bin ein Berliner. I appreciate my interpreter translating my German. Dem Dolmetscher dankbar, dass er mein Deutsch noch besser übersetzt hat.
how does a president go about making a decision, like Cuba, for example?
The most recent one was hammered out really our policy decision over a period of 5 or 6 days. During that period, the 15 people, more or less, who were directly consulted, frequently changed their view because whatever action we took had so many disadvantages to it. And each action that we took raised the prospect that it might escalate the Soviet Union into a nuclear war. Finally, however, I think a general consensus developed and certainly seemed after all alternatives were examined that the course of action that we finally adopted was the right one. If we had had to act on the Wednesday in the first 24 hours, I don't think probably we would have chosen as prudently as we finally did, a quarantine against the use of offensive weapons. In addition, that had much more power than we first thought it did, because I think the Soviet Union was very reluctant to have us stop ships which carried with them a good deal of their highly secret and sensitive material. One of the reasons I think that the Soviet Union withdrew the IL-28s was because we were carrying on very intensive low-level photography. Now, no one would have guessed, probably, that that would have been such a harassment. Mr. Castro could not permit us to indefinitely continue widespread flights over his island at 200 feet every day. And yet he knew if he shot down one of our planes that then it would bring back a much more serious reprisal on him. So it's very difficult to always make judgments here about what the effect will be of our decisions on other countries. In this case, it seemed to me that we did pick the right one. In Cuba in 1961.
Let's face it, we fell for the Kennedys. The president simply seduced the press with elegant words and a natural wit.
It's been a long time since a president and his family have been subjected to such a heavy barrage of teasing and fun-poking and satire. Can you tell us whether you read and listen to these things and whether they produce annoyment or enjoyment?
Annoyment. No, they produce, yes, I have read them and listened to them. Actually, I listened to Mr. Meade's record, but I thought it sounded more like Teddy than it did me. But, so he's annoyed.
Would you save us a couple of hours' work tonight and explain what the Band-Aid is doing on your left hand?
Well, I cut my finger when I was cutting bread. Unbelievable as it may sound.
Former Vice President Nixon has been making a number of suggestions on American foreign policy recently. In doing so, do you think he's sounding like a would-be presidential candidate again?
No, I've taken him at his word that he won't run America.
I assure you that no matter what some of my good-intentioned friends and certainly, I would say, honest opponents may suggest to the contrary, I'm not going to walk away till I get that job done. People around me didn't bring things to me that they probably should have, because I was frankly just too busy trying to do the nation's business to run politics. And on that, I say, if mistakes are made, however, I'm not blaming the people down below. The man at the top's got to take the heat for all of them. And I want to say this to the television audience. I made my mistakes. But in all of my years of public life, I have never profited from public service. I've earned every cent. And in all of my years of public life, I have never obstructed justice. And I think, too, that I could say that in my years of public life, that I welcome this kind of examination, because people have got to know whether or not their president's a crook. Well, I'm not a crook. I've earned everything I've got.
It was founded on the principle that all men are created equal. If an American, because his skin is dark, cannot eat lunch in a restaurant open to the public, if he cannot send his children to the best public school available, if he cannot vote for the public officials who represent him, then who among us would be content to have the color of his skin changed and stand in his place?
Ybor City, West Tampa, all the civic clubs who would like to present you this humidor full of cigars. Also from the Tampa Cigar Industry and Cigar Festival Association.
And my daughter Marlene will make the representation for it.
President Kennedy, this call is for your daughter Caroline.
At the Baker Hotel, movie star Joan Crawford gives autographs, and in her capacity as bottling executive, joins the receiving line with another famed figure, former Vice President Richard Nixon, who wryly comments on the purpose of the president's visit.
Well, when I say it's political, I'm not criticizing you for making the trip, but I think the purpose of the trip primarily is not the investigation of how the space program is going, but the purpose is to mend fences in Texas.
When I read the report that Congressman Thomas was thinking of resigning, I called him up on the phone and asked him to stay as long as I stayed. I didn't know how long that would be, but I wanted him to stay.
At 9:30 that evening, the president is still in Houston. After boosting Democratic Congressman Thomas in his banquet speech, President Kennedy praises the city's role in the accomplishments of the space program.
Next month, when the United States of America fired the largest booster in the history of the world into space for the first time, giving us the lead, fired the largest payload into space, giving us the lead. It will be the largest payroll, too. And who should know that better than Houston? They put all of it right in here. But in any case, the United States next month will have a leadership in space, which would...
I think that our chances that never happens in the vice presidency. I understand that everything's in perfect order all the time. They don't get the votes, but it's well organized.
Jack County was a magnificent actor. I mean, he played the role really, really well.
I'm now going to have to give a new speech.
Certainly at Labor Day, when campaigns traditionally start, Nixon was the favorite.
You all know Pat Hillings, don't you?
Will you take one or two, please, Roger?
The first debate between the two really changed the equation.
Now, can I see camera one, please? Close. Now, what do you want me to do, this?
Kennedy realized that this was going to be important. Nixon never believed it. In fact, Nixon, that afternoon, made a major speech. Kennedy rested.
I think that we both just, if he's agreeable, I think we just both just...
Nixon arrived first. They had all sorts of objections. They thought the chairs were too close together. They didn't like the color of the background. So we had to repaint the set.
It's like a brick wall.
Because the Nixon people thought he was blending into the background.
Oh, incidentally,
And I was standing there talking to Nixon, and all of a sudden I turned around, and there's Jack Kennedy. He didn't have anything in common with Nixon. He felt that Nixon was uncomfortable in his own skin, and they made Jack uncomfortable. And I said to Kennedy, do you want makeup? And he said, no, I don't need any makeup. He was tanned. He looked like, young Lochinvar, as he always looked. Nixon looked pretty bad. But Nixon heard Kennedy say, I don't want any makeup. And immediately he figured, uh-oh, I can see the headlines now. Nixon uses makeup, Kennedy doesn't. So he said, no, I don't want any makeup. And they came out, and I looked at him on camera, and I said, oh my God.
I think I better shave.
Are we in for trouble?
It is a pleasure to be here tonight and to participate in this program, which opens up a series of discussions sometimes known as great debates. Is that about the right tone of voice?
During that campaign, he began to understand not only the tremendous power of television, but how good he was at it.
Well, Mr. President, it's been a long time since we've had a definitive report on your health from the best possible source. How is your aching back?
It depends on the weather, political and otherwise.
I don't believe in managed news at all. I thought we ought to get everything we want.
I think we should do, Mr. Gray. I'm for that.
Mr. President, this is a related question. Agents of Dr. Gallup ask people this question: do you think the Kennedy administration is pushing integration too fast or not fast enough? 50% replied that they thought you were pushing too fast. Would you comment?
The fact is, that same poll showed 40% or so thought it was more or less right. I thought that was rather impressive because it is change. Change always disturbs, and therefore I was surprised that there wasn't greater opposition. I think we're going at about the right tempo.
Okay, I wasn't too long-winded. I just basically wanted to, like I said, we get so caught up in the arcane of, like, of President Kennedy's murder, we kind of forget that we lost a man, we lost the president, for all his faults. I think basically, put it down into like a common denominator. He was a good guy. You might say to yourself, well, that's all well and good. It's interesting, Vince, but what's that have to do with assassination? Actually, it has more to do with it than you might think. One of the things, actually probably the biggest thing I've uncovered in my research is to debunk the notion that supposedly President Kennedy, if you read any, like, well, the Warren Commission report, Jim Bishop's book, William Manchester's book, just about any other book since that time, even like the House Select Committee reinvestigated the assassination in the 70s, they basically make it out to be a situation that Oswald or no Oswald, conspiracy, no conspiracy. President Kennedy, he basically had it coming because he ordered these men to do certain things, not to do certain things, and it's a shame it happened, but he kind of set himself up to be a sitting duck. And then he was supposedly difficult to protect, and again, ordered these men not to move and whatnot, but some of the books, like Manchester and whatnot, really make him out to be almost like a sinister figure with the way he was almost like a totalitarian, like, don't do this, don't do that, and some of the other, supposedly he said, get that goddamn bubble top off unless it's raining, supposedly. And again, when you see his nature, and more importantly, getting into my specific research, is, I interviewed a lot of Secret Service agents that protected President Kennedy, and actually close to 70, all told, and agents that either were with him part-time, and also protected other presidents by default. I mean, they were there, some of them all the way from the FDR days up to including the Reagan days. They went up, field officers to retire and whatnot. And the feeling I came away with, well, it's not just a feeling, forget that. The truth of the matter was, it blew me away, was I couldn't believe how one after another were saying that, no, he was a very nice man, never interfered with their actions at all. It's almost like they were reading cue cards. Here I am, a stranger, calling out of nowhere. I mean, I started this, I'm 40 now, so back in the early 90s, mid-20s, whatever. From that point on, you're talking to a stranger on the phone, or they're writing to me, and now the information superhighway, email, and one after another, very nice man, never interfered with their actions at all. This is not true, and that's the general overview of that. Get into specifics in a moment, but it was all by happenstance. I didn't have any axe to grind. Actually, I started out, again, like I said, opening. Now, I thought there was a possibility there was some sort of conspiracy. I was mainly interested in President Kennedy, and I've got other presidents too, and other things, but his life and times, and obviously, the mystery of his death fascinated me, but I didn't really have any particular axe to grind. When I talk to these guys, more just like, wow, you were there, you knew, what was he like, what about this particular event, and so forth, and a lot of it was just totally by accident. One of the biggest things of all, specific thing here would be, one of the notions is supposedly President Kennedy had ordered the agents off the back of the car. Normally, agents walked on or near the rear of the limousine. And big luminary in case we got it. Special agent in charge of the White House detail, Gerald Bain, or Jerry Bain. I called him on September 27, 1992. Luckily I did, because unfortunately 6 months later he died of cancer. I called him, and basically just laid out, I took it as gospel from reading all the books over the continent. Supposedly President Kennedy ordered these men off, and obviously it had an effect, a net effect in what happened in Texas, because these agents weren't by the car, and then what happened, the shots rang out, and unfortunately he was killed, and they were able to protect him in time. And he said, what he said before, because he said, I don't remember Kennedy ever saying anything about not having agents on the back of the car. If you watch the newsreel pictures, you'll see agents on the back of the car, and then he starts specifically mentioning the trip to Berlin, and I'm like, this is unbelievable. But then I calm down, I'm thinking the devil's advocate. You always got to think of the other side. You got to think almost like a defense attorney. People try to rain on your parade a little bit. They're like, that's good, Vince, but it could be a senile old guy. Get some corroborations. It's tantalizing, but just one guy out there. He might have been the head of the White House detail, but he was 76 at the time. So I was like, yeah, that's true. So just one after another after another. And oftentimes, not even telling them that I spoke to such and such, and never saying anything like a leading question, like, hey, this guy told me this. What do you think? Is this true? Just basically saying the same thing, calling them from a genuine interest to talk to these guys, just tell them, I've been interested in the Secret Service for whatever reason, blah, 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 and tell them some, the things I thought were interesting, and just, again, one after another after another. It was like a cue card thing. It struck me some of the verbiage was always the same, too. Like, very nice man, wouldn't have interfered with our actions at all. And again, by showing, I know it was interesting in and of itself, but I think what comes through is, another way to put it, what a nice guy President Kennedy was. And when you see that, it is hard to believe that he would have been in that kind of position. He's so busy, with political actions, campaigning and whatnot, and that was, trip to Texas was an early re-election bid. And all his duties and all the responsibility of the world. He's a leader of the free world. He's going to take the time to turn around and get these agents off the back of my car. And that was like kind of the genesis of everything. And it came about by accident because, again, if Gerald Bain way back in '92 would have told me, oh yeah, that's true. And matter of fact, I would have, oh, okay. And I wouldn't have thought anything of it. And I would have told, okay, that's true. And maybe it wouldn't have even carried further than just the fact that, wow, I spoke to this guy that protected President Kennedy. Isn't that neat? For lack of a better way of putting it. And that maybe been where the matter rested from there. But again, just one after another, just things, it was almost like a domino effect. One thing after another just fell. And I think just to summarize here, again, working from my notes, because it's basically a situation, I can do a lot of this off the cuff, but I like to make sure I don't forget things. And just think people have to realize something. The Secret Service is responsible so much more in this case, far more than most people know or suspect. And this is like a 20-point small recap here. You got the protection of President Kennedy in and of itself, Secret Service, what they do, as well as protecting our currency. Okay, planning of the Texas trip. They were there, to check the motorcade ride and supposedly check the buildings and other things. So protection and planning of the trip too. Inside knowledge of JFK's personal life and national security issues. By default, these men were there. I mean, they saw and heard a whole bunch of things that obviously could be compromising. About Kennedy's, womanizing and things like that. And get into that in a moment, because actually things that you don't think are germane are more germane than you might think. They had JFK's body after death, presence at Parkland and Bethesda Hospital. Agents were at both hospitals. So again, when you think about all the other authors and their theories and whatnot, in their evidence, a lot of times people overlook the men that protect the president, because I think our first reaction is to think, why would these guys were there to protect them? What could they be up to? So your mind, it's almost like I can say the CIA has a sinister implication too. And actually a lot of them are very patriotic. I'm no spokesman or defender of the CIA, far from it. But they have a natural negative connotation. People think of the FBI, especially J. Edgar Hoover, they have it negative. But we think it's our first reaction is, oh, these guys are great. They're noble. They can take a bullet for the president. So it's almost like a psychological thing to get over that. And a little detail, they had control of Air Force One, Air Force Two, the C-130 transport plane that carried back the limousines, the autopsy X-ray photos, the autopsy reports, JFK's clothing, 3 pieces of JFK's skull, the magic bullet, recordings of the Dallas Police radio, prime assassination witnesses, interviews, the initial interviews of the Texas School Depository witnesses, initial interviews of the Parkland doctors, the TV radio recordings of the Parkland doctors, the captivity of and interviews of Marina Oswald's widow, first reenactments and surveys, and the assassination photos and films. They actually had their hands over a whole bunch of things. And again, people, when they look at this case, whether they take a viewpoint that it was a conspiracy or not, most people do believe it's a conspiracy. They don't. There's a natural tendency to overlook the Secret Service. And I think I was going to show that the first DVD was basically just to kind of like a human interest thing, and to show like President Kennedy's nature. I think one of the things I will go into briefly before I show the next one. And the next one I'm actually going to be talking over, and you actually get to see. It's one thing for me to stand up here and, you know, that little Minute Kill Kennedy clip is a good little intro, but it's one thing for me to sit up at a lectern and tell you things. It's another thing to actually show you something. I have a compilation now. It's my own home editing, so sometimes you can tell the other one cuts off a little bit too soon sometimes, but a lot of it, the next one's going to be a lot of rare footage from the JFK library and obscure documentaries and things over the years. It's like a hodgepodge of things. We actually get to see some of the things I'm going to tell you about. One of the big things, as I alluded to, is about it's on or near the rear of JFK's limousine would have prevented his death. It's pure and simple. Numerous murder cases from 1961 to 1963, including the trip before in Florida, November 18th, agents rode on the rear of the car, or at the very least were walking or jogging, and sometimes running besides the car. Okay. And there's a precedent for this, as you'll see, during FDR, Truman, and Eisenhower, and even afterwards during LBJ, Nixon, Ford, Carter, and Reagan. Agents perform these functions. The little postscript would be, since the Reagan days, especially in this 9/11 world, the cars are totally armored. Now, during inaugurals, you'll see the agents running by the car. But, you know, that's a thing of the past from the Reagan. In fact, Reagan's inaugural in January of '81 was the last time agents actually rode on the limousine. But the media that day and soon after, as you'll see, pretty amazing little bootleg clip from ABC TV that day, not the local affiliate, the national, one of the newsmen, to listen to an audience of many millions of people, was wondering, well, normally agents walk beside the car, we don't see any of these pictures. But like, I guess like my dad always told us, you know, that day, 20 people could have killed Kennedy. The details went in one ear, not the other. We were so devastated. Anything they were saying, we just weren't getting a grasp of. So now, with hindsight, we look back at these comments, and they're amazing, but they all just went by. It was live TV. And we'll see that in a second. But anyway, the Warren Commission, you know, has basically been castigated through the years, rightly so, but they did do some good things. One of the things they did is they looked at this issue, too. They must have been suspicious because 6 months later, 6 months to the day, actually, April 22nd, only because they asked Chief Rowley of the Warren, Chief Rowley of the Secret Service, sorry, is this true about agents not being on the limousine? Why? Or not? So Chief Rowley had 5 agents in the White House detail. Now they combined the JFK and LBJ details, so it was actually almost close to 50 agents. But he chose just 5 for their experience with President Kennedy. And the 5 did say, one way or another, even though they were losing the troops back in 1961, but they also did, yeah, President Kennedy did order the agents off the car. And you think, well, Vince, that should be where the matter rests, right? Well, one of them was Gerald Bain. His report, you know, says one thing and he tells me another thing. The other report's Floyd Boring. His report says one thing, he tells me another. Emory Roberts, the other one, he's deceased, and his report just merely says he's following Floyd Boring, his superior's order. John Reddy wouldn't go on the record with me at all, but he's, again, just following Floyd Boring's... Floyd Boring, by the way, was assistant to Gerald Bain. And Clint Hill is the last one, and we'll get into this a little bit, he was very angry with me, and would also name Floyd Boring as the source. So what you get down to is a situation where these 5 reports are written, and I'm taking at face value too, you know, black and white. These 5 reports, I don't care if they didn't interview the other, or have reports from 95% of the other agents. There's 5 reports saying President Kennedy, albeit sometimes 4 days before Dallas, or sometimes back in 1961, supposedly told these men not to be there. I would take that as face value, and that would be it. But again, it falls like a house of cards. Gerald Bain, what he said to me, Floyd Boring, what he said to me adamantly, President Kennedy never told us to do that. And it falls like a house of cards. They're the primary sources. The other 3 were just following the lead of Floyd Boring. And more importantly than that, and you'll see in some of these films and photos, when I looked at the films and photos of the Florida trip, and I got some of the rare Cecil Stoughton photos from the JFK library. Some weren't published, and they're showing the agents on the back of the car. I'm thinking, wait a minute now. Supposedly he ordered them off the car. This is very confusing, but I'm seeing pictures of them on the car. I don't get it. And one of the men in the car was Congressman Sam Gibbons. Typical whenever there's a motorcade, they have like a local dignitary. He was the dignitary, and I wrote him a letter, and I was telling Tom earlier, this could have been, there's an old saying with lawyers, don't ever ask a question you don't know the answer to. Because if he would have came back to me and said something different, my research, at least in this area, would have been right out the window, and this was only like three years ago to change. Wrote me a letter back. My letter to him was basically, is this true, sir? I noticed that you were on all the parts of the Florida trip, President Kennedy. Did he order the agents off the back of the car? Did you see evidence of it? Did you hear it? He wrote me back and he said, oh, President Kennedy didn't order them. In fact, they were on the back of the car during the entire Florida trip. President Kennedy was in a very good mood during the trip, and no, that's not true at all. Okay, so again, there's even more agents. Now, that's the 5 reports, and I just, like a house of cards, those go, and then the films and photos, and I'll show those in a second. But then, you got, those are the actual agents I spoke to. Rufus Youngblood, Robert Bob, Marty Underwood, he was an agent, he was a Democratic National Committee man. Dave Powers, who was a longtime aide to JFK, and he rode in the fog car in Dallas, said that President Kennedy never ordered agents off the back of the car. Jacqueline Kennedy herself alluded in private interviews that she wished the agents were on the back of the car that day, among other things. Winston Lawson, the planner of the Texas trip, one of the advance agents, who wrote to me, and a lot of this, not just telling me, but sometimes even writing to me and telling me this isn't true. It's amazing. You expect these guys to toe the official line, especially knowing that this X amount of years later, the Oliver Stone film came and went. There's always, what's this young kid, what's his axe to grind? Oh yeah, it is true. And to put it in writing, especially all these years later, actually lends more credence that something's amiss here. Abraham Bolden, Bob Lilly, Maurice Martineau, Art Godfrey, Sam Kinney, who was the driver of the Fall car that day, the Secret Service car right behind Kennedy's in Dallas, also on the Florida trip and many other trips, said, oh, President Kennedy was a Joel just like John F. Kennedy. There's no truth to this at all. Winston Lawson, I already mentioned him, sorry, Don Lawton, similar name, John Norris, James Riley to the Warren Commission said, no president will tell the Secret Service what they can or cannot do. And the Warren Commission just let that go. And all these connections. Arlen Specter was the lead attorney, and he's the one who interviewed. He did the majority. He's the one who questioned James Riley on that. There's no follow-up. Typical. It's like Riley says this, and he doesn't realize. Wait, we have these 5 reports, sir, that say something else. He goes, oh, okay, that's it. I know some of these names won't mean anything to you. Just to tell you real quick, Jerry Kivett. One name won't. Pierre Salins, I'm sure a lot of people remember, he was press secretary of President Kennedy, said that President Kennedy had a very good rapport with the Secret Service and never told them that. And the word never is just like the big thing. It wasn't just like once in a while, you think, okay, there's a little wiggle room. Maybe every once in a while, President Kennedy was one of those kind of moves that, let's go like today, boys, and whatnot. And the word never was used over and over again. In fact, Lynn Meredith, one of the agents I spoke to, he thinks Oswald did it. But he thinks the number one reason why President Kennedy wasn't killed is because his colleagues were on the back of the car. There you go. A couple names, just for the record, real quick. Darwin Horn, Sam Solomon, Frank Stoner, Jerry O'Rourke, Vincent Mraz, Walt Coughlin, and Jerry Blaine. Not to be confused with Jerry Banks and similar names. Most of these, Larry Newman, Frank Yeager, and the aforementioned Sam Gibbons. Now, most of those agents I mentioned to you were White House detail agents, and most of them were actually on some part of the Texas trip as well as obviously other trips. And before we get into some of the other specifics, I think I'll show the second DVD. And this one I'm actually going to do a little bit of narration. Okay, right here is just to show, like I was talking about, the precedent before Kennedy. This is during the FDR days, and there's agents on the car. Again, very standard thing that people just took for granted. I mean, that's what the Secret Service was there to do. And you'll see during the Truman days.
Was the bubble top standard?
Back in, which you talking about during those days?
Eisenhower, yeah.
Not standard, not used all the time. Okay. It depends, but not always for inclement weather. That's another issue we'll get to. This is during the Eisenhower days. And, it's pretty interesting, by the way, this little clip here. This is from a Canadian documentary on the various presidential limousines that came out in 1996. And again, we take for granted, but this is what these agents did. I mean, it's pretty much their normal duty. They're there to be seen and heard, so to speak, to this day. That's what they do. And they're on or near the rear of the limousine. That's what they do. And by the way, there's Chief Riley, for what it's worth. He was there from basically the FDR days up to the early Nixon days. He was chief, though, from the Kennedy era up to Nixon. And here's the rear platforms of Kennedy's car. But jumping ahead now, I wanted to show you before. This is the refurbished Kennedy car for LBJ, and even then, after the fact, there they are in the back of the car. This is during the Ford days. I didn't get too in-depth with this. I didn't want to go too crazy with, just give you a little representative sample of some of the other presidents. It's more a little more detailed from the JFK days. And obviously, Ronald Reagan here. Then again, we won't even bat an eyelash at this. This is what most people thought, even back then. This is what they did there to be seen, to be heard. Robert D. Prospero right there in the back, became the head of the White House detail. This is a few months before the Reagan assassination attempt, and Secret Service performed a tremendous job that day, March of '81. But proximity is the thing. With the Secret Service, that's the big deal. And it doesn't matter how great these agents are in their training. It's proximity is the key. If they're not there, I don't care how good they are, they're not going to do their job. You know, it's not going to be a success for what they're trying to accomplish. So there's the befores, the after. Now there's some of the Kennedy days here. Just showing some of the various. This is the agents actually. This is I think it's the trip to Berlin here. This is from a various amalgam of sources. That's what some of the editing and some of these clips go by so quick. It's like you had to really be careful. Like this was a voiceover. It's actually in some peripheral areas. It shows a bubble top too on his card too. And this is demonstrating what they did. Say a well-wisher just came up, and then agent who just brushes them aside. This is England in the summer of '63. And again, this is actually showing the clip of the bubble top you were asking before. This is from the Kennedy days. This is JFK library film. I don't think this has been shown in its entirety. So it's a combination, like I said, from over-the-counter videos, TV programs, some bootleg footage, and some stuff from the actual Kennedy library itself. There's Jerry Bay here, the White House detail right there. Let's see there. And that's what those handles were built for. Not only was the back bumper, but also they were able to get a good hold on the back of the car. It wasn't just slow speed, sometimes it was very fast speeds that the car was going through crowds and whatnot. So it wasn't always slow speeds, so that's another reason why those are there, obviously. And there's the side platforms too that just came up. This is the car as it is now in the Henry Ford Museum in Dearborn, Michigan. Refurbished. In some angles, it still looks the same, but it's when LBJ had it redone, he had it colored black instead. This is a trip to Italy, and there's agents in the back of the car right there. This came from the JFK library itself.
They're all over the car there.
Yeah, this is, again, typical. And again, supposedly the folklore was President Kennedy didn't want this done. This is what's supposed to happen in Dallas. It's a shame Oswald or no Oswald. The shots ring out. What happens, happens. Supposedly one of President Kennedy's favorite poems was, I have a rendezvous with death. Fine print is we all have a rendezvous with death. I don't think any of us are immortal. But they, again, after the fact, they make such a big deal about some of the things he said in hindsight. And I guess it's a little bit of that dramatic license people like to put on things. It's like, oh, we had it coming, look what he did, Just like the thing with Abraham Lincoln, supposedly his guard stepped out for a drink, and that's how John Wilkes Booth got in to shoot him. It's things that have carry a life of its own. This is a rapid clip here, and actually pretty rapid. You got them hanging on the back of the car. And again, imagine if shots rang out, what these guys do. You'll hear it coming up. Now, I have this muted, but in a little bit, there's actually going to be interviews coming up with some of these agents that they did on national TV and some documentaries. And you'll see some things. But the angle from the school book depository, if the shot would have rang out, JFK may or may not have been hit by the first shot, but the fatal shot, he definitely would have been. Another thing that's unstated, getting to is the press being in front of the car. We wouldn't need Abraham Zapruder's rickety film. We would have had professional newsmen there too. Here's a little side note. This is a trip to Ireland, and he's using a follow-up car as the main car. Sam Kinney told me that the main car broke down, so he didn't use a follow-up car for his main car. So he's got this, but that's Jerry Blaine, that's Sam Sullivan, who obviously, if you've seen the footage, the two of like about 40 agents I spoke to said, no, President Kennedy never did that. This is in Caracas, Venezuela. This is actually from a lecture I did back in '96. So I had to just transfer this. And there's the bubble top, there's agents on the back of the car there. And again, you got to keep in mind how hard it is to find this footage. There's an old saying that people remember your entrances and your exits and everything else in the middle doesn't mean anything. You found stock footage. You find JFK's inaugural and his assassination. It's very tough to find the in-between. And it's so many times it's voiceovers, and it just goes by so quick. To slow this stuff down. What you're seeing, if I was to play at normal speed, it'd go by like in 3 seconds with a voiceover. So it's very hard to find these things. And it's costly from the JFK library, too. And it's time-consuming for finding. You'd find a lot of red herrings that ask for motorcade footage. I'd get something totally different. So it's really tough. There's a whole bunch of footage that's probably never even been released there.
Is that Kellerman to his side?
Yes, yeah, that's Roy Kellerman, actually right beside Kennedy, who ironically rode in the car with Kennedy. And I guess there's no harm getting a little ahead of myself, but he was a third stringer, meaning that Gerald Bain was the head of the White House detail. Floyd Bourne, the aforementioned Bourne, was second in charge. Well, he was a third stringer. Now, Dallas, there was so much of foreboding about Dallas in particular on the Texas trip. I mean, Senator Fulbright, Stevenson, who was attacked in Dallas the month before, several others warned Kennedy not to go to Dallas. JFK himself even said, we're heading into nut country now. And yet, they have a third stringer go along. You can make an analogy. It'd be like going to the Super Bowl with your third stringer, say your starting quarterback. And in effect, that's what Roy Kellerman was, and several of his deputies and some other people that had a hand in things. And it's all about who's there to do things. This real quick, just to show the interaction with President Kennedy with some of the agents. That's Fort Worth that morning. He's getting instructions from the agents where to go after his speech and so forth. This is showing the interaction. He basically, in effect, took orders from them. Harry Truman even said, the Secret Service is the only boss the President of the United States really has. I mean, that's it. This is Ashland, Wisconsin, in September of '63. After a while, it's going to be like a broken record, or when I show my age, broken CD or something. Of clips, you're going to see that. You're going to see so much similarity because that's it. But again, official history, you shouldn't be seeing much of this. And
That was September of '63?
Yeah, that was it. That's why I have this part muted. I'm going to turn the sound up on some of the agent interviews from some of the network broadcasts coming. Because if you have the audio, it'll be very confusing because so many different sources talking about things that have nothing to do with what I'm showing and whatnot. So it's like a two-part thing. I guess it's on a human interest level, speaking to these guys and protecting President Kennedy and other presidents, and what they thought of the man and whatnot, and some of the interesting things about his life and time, his administration. But then at the same time, when it relates to what did and did not happen in Dallas, and the question of conspiracy, then you see things that go against the official history, and that's interesting in itself. And some of these clips again show JFK getting into a bubble top, and supposedly President Kennedy didn't like the bubble top. And now that issue is not as clear cut as some of the other ones. I acknowledge that in my work that it's more about an option that was not explored. Many times the bubble top was on the back of the car, either in a partial or full format. It's like a sunroof configuration. Could have been the back and the front, given the opportunity to stand up every once in a while. But this is actually the Florida trip in question I was talking about, 4 days before Dallas. This is the beginning of it, right here. This is from a David Wolper special from 1964, the next year. This is a little clip. That's Sam given to us. Got the letter from about Kennedy never ordered him off the car. This is the beginning of it. This is the Cecil Stoughton photo. There's an agent there and there. Don Lawton and Chuck Zaforo, who were right beside the car. It's a still photo. Right there. Okay, and here is again. We'll have the audio up in a second.
Okay.
Actually, it doesn't hurt to turn it up now. Actually, this is the footage that you saw the excerpt from in The Men Who Killed Kennedy. This is from that James Earl Jones. He was actually on DVD from 1988, using that arrival footage of JFK at Dallas Airport. Actually, hear a little bit of James Earl Jones' voice. Okay.
President passes right in front of a Dallas police officer, right in front of our cameras now. Somebody patted his shoulder. Mrs. Kennedy coming along behind him, grinning all the while.
Oh, and one thing I'd like to say real quick is, again, I'm not denigrating the Secret Service as an agency. I think a lot of these guys were noble. I'm saying 99% of them were off the hook, so to speak. The security they effected at Love Field was great. The security they had at the trademark, he never arrived at, the speed site where he was going to. When he left Love Field, he went on this 45-minute motorcade that was going to wind up at the Dallas trademark. The security there was good. It was the in-between, the so-called kill zone that was the bad. It was the deficiency that...
President saying thank you very much, and I may be permitted to read a presidential lip movement. Mr. Kennedy stepping in the car first. Now the President. They both in the back seat now. The President and First Lady. That motorcade will swing way around, go by the Continental Airlines maintenance hangar, head out for downtown Dallas, where thousands should already be on the street right now, waiting for a view of the President and his wife.
Also waiting.
He's making room for the ball park. They all look back at him. He's still doing it. They all look back at him, too.
Thousands should already be on the street right now, waiting for a view of the President.
Okay. There's Henry Roberts who's standing up. In fact, I have a little clip in the minute. Okay, it's repeating it, a little 20-second clip or whatever. That's Henry Roberts standing up in the flag car. He's the commander of the flag car. He's ordering them back. That's Henry Ripka, the agent who's on the back of the car, right near the back of the car, and his reaction. Paul Landis is getting into the car and is going to leave a space there. After the assassination, there was not 2 but 3 reports. Now, some of this stuff, you might think is ancient history. Some of this stuff has only come out. Forget my discovery in the early 90s. Some of these reports have only come out in the last, 10, 15 years. So you're thinking, oh, what more could be talked about in this case? I was telling Tom Morley, I said, there's been more inroads in this case in the last 10, 15 years than all the other years combined. But one of the big things for me was some of the reports that came out from the Assassination Records Review Board's releases because of the Stone film. And one of them was, there used to be just one report bad in and of itself, that mistakenly places Henry Ripka in the center rear seat of his car where he was left behind Love Field. It turns out there's a total of 3 reports that, quote-unquote, mistakenly place him in the rear of the car, here, the fall car instead of that car. What does that mean? What that means is, Henry Roberts presumably thought that after he was recalled, he got onto the car and it made room for him. But actually, for whatever reason, he was angry or whatnot, or beside himself, he ended up just staying in Love Field and affected security there at the airport as the motorcade began. And the thing about Henry Ripka is he was a protective agent that worked the fall car in Fort Worth that morning. They went to San Antonio, Houston, and Fort Worth on November 21st and 22nd, the morning of the 22nd. And this was, obviously after that.
And his wife.
Also waiting is a man with a mail order right.
Charge of the follow-up car. You can see an agent, Henry Ripka, doing his normal duty, jogging besides the limousine, when in the follow-up car, you can see Henry Roberts stand up and wave him back. You can see a very perplexed Agent Ripka waving his arms in the air several times in seeming disgust. And this is the actual Zapruder film itself. It's pretty interesting. This is actually sprocketable information with the numbers, too. And just imagine those agents would have been on or near the rear of the car, and the motorcycle formations, and on and on and on. Thing I will say here, pause this, is driver of the car, Bill Greer. I guess at this point it doesn't matter to get ahead of myself, otherwise we'll just do the whole thing out. Bill Greer, he's looking back at President Kennedy. He's a trained Secret Service agent. He's been driving the president since the Truman era. Okay? If you'd imagine if you had a loved one in the back of your car, and God forbid they were shot or something bad happened, you're naturally stupid. Like, oh my God, you're going to hit the gas. This guy's a trained agent. He's looking back once, and now this is his boss, third stringer or not, it's still his boss, Roy Kellerman, and this is through testimony now. Says, get out of line, we've been hit. And Kellerman grabs the radio microphone. Then you'll see, and it's bad enough he looked back once, he looks back again, and only until the fatal shot makes his mark, then he finally faces forward and gets out of there when it's too late. Even an author like Gerald Posner, who believes Oswald did it, there's nothing to this, even says Greer shoulders a considerable responsibility for the assassination through his gross negligence. And the biggest thing of all is, again, Arnold Specter. When Arnold Specter questioned Greer adamantly denied all these actions, there's no follow-up. Arnold Specter was horrible about one thing. I'm not even to pontificate about Arnold Specter because of the Pennsylvania connection and whatnot, but the thing about him is amazing is, he's a bright guy, he's an author, he's done a lot of good, but when you read his questioning, it just reads like pre-rehearsed testimony. It's almost like he got these guys before they were into the closed sessions of the Warren Committee. Says, look, this is what the question I'm going to ask you. This is going to be your responses, because your normal reaction would be like, now they had access to the Zapruder film on that, and the other things. Wait a minute, something's in jargon. I'm looking at the film, and you're claiming you never saw Kennedy and whatnot, and I'm seeing this and showing me something else, but there was no follow-up, and start this over again. And here's Greer's second look back. It's too late. 2 looks back, he disobeys the direct order. Now, when Roy Kellerman was interviewed by William Manchester, a little footnote buried in the death of the president, Roy Kellerman tells Manchester, Greer then looked in the back of the car. Maybe he didn't believe me. It's like, whoa. Yeah. But then it's a footnote buried in a book, and it's a 1,000-page book, and no one's following up. And, you have to have an interest in these things, or they just go in one ear and not the other. Look at things. This is a Zapruder film, obviously, full stream 5B. Sprout the whole information. Now, March of '81, the Reagan assassination attempt, all they had was the fleetness of foot. Did a tremendous job. Here they got a souped-up car and all this. Yeah, look, 2 looks back, disobeys an order. You heard what Kellerman said, Greer didn't look in the back of the car, maybe he didn't believe. When it's way too late, here's Clint Hill coming to the car, who by the way,
was killed. The Secret Service agents normally walk directly beside the car on either side. We do not see any in this photograph. Was killed. The Secret Service agents normally walk directly beside the car on either side. We do not see any in this photograph. But usually 2 or 3 Secret Service agents will walk on either side of the car so that they are there to spot anyone who is killed. The Secret Service agents normally walk directly beside the car on either side. We do not see any in this photograph. But usually 2 or 3 Secret Service agents will walk on either side of the car so that they are there to spot anyone who looks like a troublemaker.
This is actually, you'll see in a second, got to pause. Ron Gardner reporting from the New York office of ABC. This is even before President Kennedy was pronounced dead. This is from bootleg footage, obviously November 22nd, but it was rebroadcast in the, again speaking of Dallas-Fort Worth area in 1983 for the 20th anniversary. Unless you had a VCR going back then, it's the only time it's been shown since. Now I made the collector circles and people got a hold of it, and that's hours of footage and condensed down. And this is one of the clips that jumped out at me, like, wow, even the newsmen were saying that too. Now beyond Ron Gardner saying this, there's also things in print where newsmen were wondering why weren't the agents on the back of the car. And even former Chief Bauman, who was before James Rowley, Rowley replaced him, said this is a matter to look into. Why did Mrs. Kennedy have to crawl into the back of the car to receive help? And he was thinking, the reason why Mrs. Kennedy was crawling in the back of the car, she was like, where are they? Well, where are they at? Assuming they were going to be back there. And again, like I said earlier, privately, Jacqueline Kennedy said to a couple of her close friends, this came out in Edward Klein's book about 5-6 years ago in, I don't know if it's David Heyman's book, a woman called, I think it's Edward Klein's book, saying that she had a lot of animosity towards Bill Greer, the driver of the president's car, for not speeding up, and she also said, if only the Secret Service would have been stationed on the back of the car. So again, this isn't just conspiracy theorists, this is people that were actually there. So
government sources
so
now
he's not even pronounced dead, now he's pronounced dead. So soon after.
Government sources now confirm that President Kennedy is dead. So that apparently is
a targeted official by exploiting a personal weakness.
Okay, just a little quick pause here. This was shown in December of 1997 on ABC. You hear the late Peter Jennings' voice. And again, I'm just going to throw the old script out the door, basically, but it's full of 9 months ago. This people might say, again, well, Vince, what? You're saying, 99% of these guys are squeaky clean. Now, you're saying, obviously, these are the few that you think are negligent or worse. What would be the motive for these guys doing this? Why would they not do things? Why would they blame it on Kennedy? And inadvertently or otherwise, Seymour Hersh, Pulitzer Prize-winning author, came on The Dark Side of Camelot. This was the news broadcast based off his book. He interviewed 4 agents who I ended up later speaking to. One of them was on the fall car in Dallas, Tim McIntyre. And the anger, it's even worse in print, there's some moments on here. Anger towards President Kennedy womanizing. Anger, not just like, oh, you should have done that. And it gives you got to keep in mind the social mores in the late 50s, early 60s were different now. We're a lot more tolerant in this day and age of Jerry Springer and the internet and everything else, and the way people view things and whatnot. It was a whole different world back then. You had these guys raised a certain way, and even admitted in Seymour Hersh's book, hey, well, I was raised a certain way. I don't think the President of the United States should have been acting this way. And, you'll hear some of these interviews, and distinct. When you hear this, remember, Tim McIntyre rode on the fall car like 5 to 10 feet away from Kennedy, was there to protect them. Interesting thing I have to throw this in is Tim McIntyre was new to the White House detail, came from Seattle, Washington, had only joined the White House detail in the fall. So he was barely with Kennedy, and Kennedy's tragically killed under his watch. Why would you have this animosity to begin with about JFK's womanizing? But here we go.
In the Kennedy White House, members of the Secret Service were concerned that the president's private behavior made him a potential target.
Many people came into the White House who did not know who they were. He had a tendency to surround himself with ladies sometimes that were a little worrisome.
These women were of questionable character. Most of the other Secret Service agents and myself were worried about the fact that the Russians or communists or any people like that could bring in a ringer, so to speak.
We didn't know if these women were carrying listening devices, if they had syringes that carried some type of poison, or if they had Fintex cameras that would photograph the president for blackmail.
Possibility of blackmail and things like that are astounding. Who knows? I never knew the name of one of the outsiders.
One night in Seattle, we took the president up to the Olympic Hotel to secure for the night, and as we were doing that, a high-ranking law enforcement official from King County had come out of the elevator with 2 prostitutes and was walking down toward the president's door. And a senior staff member came out of the president's suite, thanked him for bringing the girls up and took them into the suite. So one of the policemen, the lieutenant, asked me, he said, does this go on all the time? And I didn't know what to say, and I said, well, we travel during the day, this only happens at night.
Prostitution, that's illegal. Procurement is illegal. And if you have a procurer with prostitutes paraded in front of you, then as a sworn law enforcement officer, you're asking yourself, well, what do they think of us?
You were on an elite assignment. It was the most elite assignment in the Secret Service. And you were there watching an elevator or a door because the president was inside with 2 hookers.
And this continued constantly. It was just not once every 6 months, not every New Year's Eve, but it was a regular thing.
Now, one thing I want to say is, obviously, we get a chuckle, and as a sidebar, he fooled around and all that. But beyond the chuckles and all that, because I understand it, part of it is, for lack of a better way of putting it, a little funny and whatnot. Hey, it was his personal life, and that's a whole other issue about we can take exception. It's a shame he did that, and he shouldn't have done that. Forget that for a second. What I'm saying is the ire that these gentlemen have, and read Seymour Hersh's book. Just take it, it's at the library for free, just a few pages. Read what they have to say. It's actually serialized in my book, too. By the way, I don't get them tainted, but if you, we'll go into this a little later, but put my name in like Google and the first page, you can actually get access to my book. It's free. I make it available online, so you get to see all the details of this. And I quote from Seymour Hersh's book. It's the anger behind the fact that he fooled around. And think about the fact that these guys were protecting President Kennedy. You're supposed to. We just heard what Tim McIntyre said. You see what he says in full length. Shame these were. This is the way it was broadcast. But here we go.
I remember one time I was with the president in Honolulu. During that trip, he went to Battleship Arizona and a few other things. The president arrived, the residence, about on time. I'd say within 10 minutes, a staff member arrived in a car escorting 2 ladies, and they marched in the house also. This was sort of the usual routine in many stops. And a colonel of the Marines turned to me and said, who are they? And I turned to him, I said, well, they're secretaries, and I assume there's some work the president wants done this evening. We protected the president in many different ways. But the Honolulu episode made me angry. It didn't make me angry. We're talking about the president of the United States. And, I'm not a holier-than-thou guy. But he just shouldn't be doing this in public like this. There was no regard for who was there. The Marine colonel was there. He knew what, what's going on. Other people were there. The Navy people were in the house. The cooks were in the house. He's the president. He's the boss. I didn't like it, but what you gonna do about it? Nothing.
The concerns of the Secret Service went beyond the dangers that prostitutes might pose. The agents learned that the president was using dangerous medication.
While I was working the White House, there was a doctor, I believe his name was Jacobson, who we used to call Dr. Feelgood. He'd periodically come to the White House with a case full of medications that possibly could have been harmful.
Dr. Max Jacobson had a loyal following among celebrities in New York and Hollywood. He injected his patients with what he called vitamin shots that
so made me angry.
This is repeated on purpose here. Look at security in summer 73 in Honolulu. See?
Meet for another 12 years was in doubt.
This is Clint Hill right
just a few feet from the president.
Back to November 22nd of 1963. You were on the fender of the Secret Service car, right behind President Kennedy's car. At the first shot, you ran forward and jumped on the back of the president's car in less than 2 seconds, pulling Mrs. Kennedy down into her seat, protected. She had climbed out of the back and she was on the way back, right?
And because of the fact that part of her husband's head had been shot off and gone off to the street.
She wasn't trying to climb out of the car, she was...
No. She was simply trying to reach that head, part of the head.
To bring it back.
That's the only thing.
Was there anything that the Secret Service or that Clint Hill could have done to keep that from happening?
Clint Hill, yes.
Clint Hill, yes? What do you mean?
If he had reacted about 0.5 of a second faster, or maybe a second faster, I wouldn't be here then.
You mean you would have gotten there and you would have taken the shot?
The third shot, yes, sir.
And that would have been all right with you?
That would have been fine with me.
But you couldn't. You got there in less than 2 seconds, Clint. You couldn't have gotten there. You surely don't have any sense of guilt about that.
Yes, I certainly do. It was my fault.
Oh. No one has ever suggested that for an instant.
If I had reacted just a little bit quicker, I could have, I guess. And I'll live with that to my grave.
Secret Service agent Clint Hill was responsible for protecting Mrs. Kennedy.
I just want to say something about Clint Hill real quick. And again, it's harkens back to what I was saying about 95 to 99% of these guys are squeaky clean and whatnot. He was hamstrung by those alleged orders that were given to him through his superiors. Floyd Boring is telling him, hey, on the Texas trip, Clint Hill was not. This is between November 19th and November 21st, according to Clint Hill's testimony to our Inspector of the Warren Commission. That Floyd Boring came to him and to let you know that President Kennedy did not want agents in the back of cars, so when you guys go to Texas, to paraphrase it, when you go to Texas, don't ride in the back of the car. Ironically, he took his own initiative and ironically disobeyed orders for brief times when they were on Main Street, a couple blocks away from the kill zone. And so it's ironic in and of itself. But nobody else rode in the back of the car, and again, that was for brief times on his own initiative. But he does claim, he testifies under oath to our inspector that it was Floyd Boring who told him and the other agents, and this allegedly came from President Kennedy, and all this is all secondary. He's taking Floyd Boring, his boss's word for it. This is 1964, this is sworn testimony. If I'm reading it, I wouldn't question that. Sounds legit to me, and I'd move on. And again, and then he wrote a report. The thing that's really amazing is this is April of 1964, and he gave his sworn testimony. Well, in March, oh no, I'm sorry, to get back. It's March of 1964 when he gave the sworn testimony. In April of 1964, he writes one of the 5 reports, and he says, I never personally was told by President Kennedy not to be on the back of the car. Someone in the administrative office of the Secret Service told me, this is between November 19th and November 21st. I don't remember the name. He said it twice, but then under oath he remembers the name. It's weird. It's like the sequence of events is bizarre. Under oath he said it's Floyd Boring. Floyd Boring took it upon himself to tell the other agents. But then in the report to his boss, Secret Service Chief Riley, he said, oh, I don't remember the name, twice. Really bizarre. I'll say one thing again, get a little out of order from what I intended, but it's the flow of the DVD here. People always ask me, Vince, you interview all these agents, whatnot. Did you actually speak to Clint Hill? And yes, I finally did. I got through to him 2 years ago. He was unlisted number in Virginia. And most of these guys are listed. He's one of the ones that was unlisted. Other than Mike Wallace and a couple of these Secret Service sanctioned documentaries. So he was actually told, you can speak to these guys. It's okay. They would give you the authority. The then current director of the Secret Service during the Clinton days, which was from the 90s, said it was okay to speak. You'll see little updates. I said it was okay to speak. He didn't speak to any private researchers and told me it was a total fluke. One of his colleagues said, the guy you want to speak to on this issue is Clint Hill. Clint Hill, here, I'll give you his address and phone number. I was like, oh my God, okay, this is amazing. It's like a coup. To speak to Clint Hill was a holy grail. For years, people say, yeah. You speak to Clint Hill. And it's like, when I quit, it was like, it was almost like disappointing to people. It was like, you didn't speak to anybody, you didn't speak to him, I guess. So I did something bold. When I did, I sent him, by certified mail, return receipt requested, so he couldn't deny he didn't get it. And again, I was as nice as I could under the circumstances to him, because I have no real animosity toward him per se, because I think he did the job best he could. I laid out, basically in Cliff Notes form, all my research, and just wasn't expecting much, his opinion on what he thought of it. And basically I was laying out, to make a long story short, I was saying, you know what, sir, it's a shame you had all this guilt. God bless you. You did a great job. You did the best job you could. It wasn't your fault. It was your boss's fault. And I put this in writing in a letter to him. Didn't get responsible. Then I decided, well, I knew what the response I could be, but I'm going to call him. Called him and never heard anger. I guess he was so angry. He was like, sir, this is Vince Palamara. I didn't hear anything. He said, you there? Yeah, I'm here. Did you get my letter? And I can't convey the anger. You know what? I have no interest in talking to you. And he hung up and wow. He needed to say he didn't want to go on the record. The fine print about Clint Hill is he's not as squeaky clean as I make him out. He was one of 8 agents that drank the night before in Fort Worth. There was a total of 9 agents that drank alcohol the night before. That's grounds for removal from the agency. Whenever an agent is in travel status, he's not supposed to touch alcohol. These guys... some reports they were liquored up pretty bad, and they're trying to conserve. They just had a beer or a scotch and water or whatnot. He was one of them. They were supposed to report for duty at 8 a.m. Some of these agents didn't get back into the Hotel Texas in Fort Worth until between 3 and 5 a.m. So between 3 hours sleep or a little more, and they're supposed to protect the president. I mean, their reflexes, that's what they live and breathe on. I mean, that's the whole thing. It's like when you see somebody running 40-yard dash or whatnot in X amount of seconds. That's the whole thing, is the speed. And then they were hamstrung. They were handicapped because they were on the follow-up car. And it's a shame. He's one of the 4. The other one was John Reddy, Paul Landis, and Glenn Bennett. So he's one of the 4. He was actually in the follow-up car. The other 5 was bad, but at least they weren't in the motorcade detail. He's one of them. So, at least he made the effort when it was too late and the shots rang out and it was all said and done. But if he would have been hamstrung by his bosses, then he would have been able to be there sooner and would have been able to protect Kennedy. He wouldn't have had all his guilt. And I hate to say, like he said, he might not be here today. He might have, quote unquote, took the shot. Actually, this is an important side note. If you remember the 1993 movie Clint Eastwood, In the Line of Fire? You guys seen that? Okay. Well, it's ironic, Clint Eastwood. This basically was confirmed by Robert Snow, who was the former head of the Public Affairs Office of the Secret Service, spoke to me, but he put this in Printing and Entertainment Weekly and some other things. And it basically was loosely the story of Clint Hill. Now, the agent you see in the still photos they doctored in the movie was John Reddy's position. They superimposed Clint Eastwood, sorry, Clint's mixed up. But basically that movie was dramatization of Clint Hill if he had a second chance. He screwed up in Dallas, and then the modern president, this is his chance for vindication. So it's amazing, and that was an officially sanctioned movie by the Secret Service. If you look at the technical supervisors, they were all, from the Secret Service. Cherry Parr being one of them, who was the head of Reagan's detail, protected Reagan that day. But Anyway, so again, I basically laid it on the line with Clint Hill in that letter. Was bold enough to say it wasn't your fault. At least you made an effort. It was your boss's, and I didn't expect much, But for what it's worth, he was very angry with me and did get anything substantive more than just to tell me he had no interest in speaking to me. So.
Clinton J. Hill and his family to ceremonies in Washington. Secretary of the Treasury Douglas Dillon acts for the nation as he commends Mr. Hill for his heroism during those tragic moments in Dallas when President Kennedy was assassinated. The agent is presented.
Even as he received his award for bravery, Clint Hill struggled with guilt. The struggle would continue for almost 30 years.
The former agent still lives in Washington, D.C. He hasn't spoken publicly about the assassination since that first 60 Minutes interview. But a few months ago, he and Mike wrote to each other.
My interview with you on 60 Minutes in 1975 turned into much more of an emotional experience than I thought possible. I did not realize I was in as much emotional distress as I obviously was. It did turn out to be a cathartic experience for me and helped me release feelings that had been pent up for a long time.
Still, the agent wrote, he remained...
I turned to see what was happening. I knew something was wrong. I saw President Kennedy grab at his throat. Before I could get to the presidential limousine, another shot had been fired and hit President Kennedy in the head. Before I could get up, by that time, Mrs. Kennedy had come out onto the trunk and was seeming, it appeared to me, to be searching for something or trying to retrieve something. But I got up on the back of the car and placed her back in the seat. The president at that time had slipped down into her lap, and I could see the back of his head, and there was a gaping hole above his right ear, about the size of my palm. And there was white brain matter and red blood throughout the entire car. The car jolted forward, and we...
But the assassination shook the organization to its base and left the agents on the detail devastated.
It was our responsibility to protect the president, and we failed to do so. Anytime that you have a job to do and you don't do it, you failed.
The failure to protect Kennedy forced the Secret Service to ask difficult questions. Should the president be allowed to ride in an open car? Should motorcade routes be published in advance? And should those routes follow paths where the president could be an easy mark? Whatever the answers, things would never change for Clint Hill.
It's something that will never go away. I still have nightmares about it. It bothered me from that point on, and it got progressively worse. Eventually, that's the reason I retired, is that the doctors finally told me that you just can't go on. Unfortunately, that particular day, all the advantages went to the shooter. Unfortunately, that particular day, all the advantages went to the shooter.
The assassination is still a defining moment, not only for the agency, but for every agent who has ever taken the oath.
You don't think about your wife or your children or your own life. Your whole focus is to save the president. And I'm sure that's what went through Clint's head as he bolted to that car, barely making it, but he got back there. And of course it was too late. And we're all different from that. I mean, we're just different from having lived through it.
If eternity has to remember me for something that was that tragic, I just couldn't live with myself. So, my philosophy was, it won't happen on my watch. It can't happen on my watch because I can't live with it.
That was the head of Clinton's detail for 8 years, Larry Hawk, testified during the Monica Lewinsky
Training was completely revamped. The number of agents jumped dramatically, and the service developed state-of-the-art threat assessment abilities. Riding in an open car would become the rare exception to the rule. The car would become armored and sealed, a rolling fortress, the very embodiment of the protective bubble.
Where were you on the day of the assassination of
This
John
is
Kennedy?
amazing. This clip right here is from 1974. This is Roger Craig, who was deputy sheriff in Dallas, And don't want to give away what he's going to tell you, but it's part of the security stripping that went on in Dallas. Here we go.
I was standing out in front of the sheriff's office, which at that time was at 505 Main Street. They've moved it since then, but it was at 505 Main Street, directly in front of the front door.
Was the motorcade passing that area at that time?
No, we had to wait about 15 minutes before the motorcade arrived, but the sheriff had sent us out there that early to wait.
Were you merely spectator or were you on duty?
Well, no, I was on duty, but a couple hours before Kennedy was to arrive, the sheriff called us in, what I call the street people, the plainclothesmen, the detectives, and he instructed us that we were to stand out in front and in no way take part in the security of that motorcade, that we were merely spectators and nothing more.
Did that seem unusual to you?
It did to me at the time because there were so many people around and so few Dallas police officers. This is one of the first things I noticed was the lack of Dallas police officers. Try to keep the people back.
Adlai Stevenson, who had been assaulted in Dallas the previous month, and others, including Congressman Henry Gonzalez from San Antonio, Texas, had warned President Kennedy not to travel through Dallas. But the Secret Service told the president that he had nothing to worry about, since the greatest security in the history of the country for an American president, comprised of the coordination of all the local and federal police, had been set up for Dallas. Yet Roger Craig, an intelligent, instinctive police officer, and many other police officers were specifically told not to take part in the security that day. And Dallas-based FBI agent James Hosty, assigned to Lee Harvey Oswald, Oswald who had just returned from the Soviet Union. Oswald was a high security threat by FBI standards. Mr. Hosty had no assignment to protect the president that day either. Hosty told a Congressional Investigating Committee many years later that he was having lunch down the street when the president was killed. The greatest security ever? Even the normal security on both the federal and local levels had been
was killed. The Secret Service agents normally walk directly beside the car on either side. We do not see any in this photograph, but usually 2 or 3 Secret Service agents will walk on either side of the car so that they are there to spot anyone who looks like a trouble.
November 1963, President Kennedy planned a trip to Texas. Secret Service agent Wynn Lawson flew to Dallas to survey security.
I was in charge of that advance, and I arrived first. The second advance person that was going to be later helping me in Dallas didn't arrive when I did. He didn't arrive until just a few days before the event.
Now, I don't know, they have this tendency to not name people, I don't know why. Well, who he's talking about is David Grant, was assistant advance agent. He came from the Florida trip where he worked with Floyd Boring. Amazingly, there's connections. It's not necessarily sinister as people thought. David Grant's a brother-in-law of Clint Hill. Married, I guess, is Clint's wife's sister or something like that. Doesn't name him here, but here's the thing. Up to and including the trip to Texas happened November 21st. It was going to go through and include November 23rd. November 22nd is when the ill-fated motorcade Dallas happened. But the planning for the trip basically began November 4th, so good, almost like 3 weeks in advance. And when you read the literature, you usually see the names of Winston Lawson and Forrest Sorrells. Forrest Sorrells was the head of the Dallas office. Winston Lawson, who's the White House detail lead agent. Well, he names them about naming them, saying, well, the second advance person didn't arrive until a few days before the event, like real nonchalantly. Well, he kind of he corroborated my research, but people probably wouldn't pick up the significance of that anyway. What it goes to show you is, what I found through my research, is a lot of things changed when David Grant joined. And again, this timing, you can read into if it's sinister, if it's coincidence, whatnot. Between November 18th and November 19th is when, getting ahead of myself here, but I guess I'm going to do this a little bit different. Is when the motorcade route was changed, is when all the stories about JFK didn't want the motorcycles by him, they were reduced. when JFK didn't want the agents on or near the rear limousine. With the Sheriff's Department, you saw that clip of Roger Craig? It's in writing the day before. This is stuff in the Warren Commission. We're going to take my word for it. Look in the Warren Commission report involved. You'll see a report from Sheriff Decker, who was Roger Craig's boss, to Forrest Sorrell, said, yes, we'll offer a full support. We'll even offer an additional 15 men in the Dallas Morning News of October 26th. The greatest contingent of Dallas police ever for a visiting dignitary will be set up for Dallas. Not only would not Dallas police, vote for the trip, but they were not even facing the crowd. They were facing the cars. They were used to, you're supposed to face the crowd, not stand with your back to the crowd and face the cars. Their numbers were limited. You just heard the Sheriff's Department was told to stand down that day, in no way participate in securing a motorcade. Yet the day before, you got that. The motorcycles I just mentioned, in passing about them being reduced. Normally, Kennedy had a total of about 18 motorcycles and about 3 to 6 on each side, and that was used up to and including the morning of them being at Fort Worth. So San Antonio, Houston, Fort Worth on November 21st, and then they stayed over into November 22nd. And all prior Texas trips, not Texas trips, all prior trips, Florida, Germany, all the European tour, on and on and on. You'll see it's very standard, just like you'll see the agents by the car, you'll see the motorcycles by the car. They were taken away. The House Select Committee even used the verbiage, it was uniquely insecure. Even used the verbiage, it was uniquely insecure what the Secret Service did. And again, the whole theme is always JFK didn't want the motor. That was the reason they were given. JFK didn't like the motorcycles bomb. He couldn't have conversations, too noisy, the of the engines. But yet he didn't mind the motorcycles from 1961 up to that morning beside him. But lo and behold, they're not going to be there. And what that means is the motorcycles not only would have been more trained police officers there to see things, but they're also there to shield the president from the side. So obviously, if you think a shot came from the front, well, use your imagination, they would have been there too. Just more witnesses taken out of the way. You had the press, which I showed earlier. The press normally rode in front. The press photographers had a flatbed truck for still and motion photography. They weren't there. It was canceled last minute. Dallas Morning News reporter Tom Dillard went on C-SPAN's amazing clip, said it was canceled last minute. It turned out he testified to the Warren Commission. I did not know this. Said it was canceled last minute. We were putting Chevrolet convertibles and put us totally out of the picture near the end of the motorcade. That's why we had, thank God, we had Abrams and Bruder and amateurs, because the professionals weren't there. So imagine a scenario of professional photographers, press people in the press buses would have been close. Okay, you have that. You have the motorcycles. You have the agents on or near the rear of the car. Or the Sheriff's Department, the police. I'm sure there's other thing I'm forgetting about that I'll go through there in a second. But, and again, Oswald or no Oswald, and you have shots ring out, they would have been there to protect the man. And most medical people said President Kennedy would have lived from the shot to medical controversy. It was either the back or the neck. He would have lived through that. It was just the fatal shot. And you have Greer, who looks back not once but twice, disobeys a direct order. So again, that's why it's tough to sometimes make head and tail. It depends on what mood I'm in. Sometimes I think it's sinister, sometimes I think it's gross negligence. It really, that's an excellent girl. It depends on which way you slice it. Sometimes people say, you got it, look at this, it's sinister. And some people say, oh, it's just gross negligence. But these things happen and did not happen. And the big thing, though, the big theme of this all was after the fact, it was laid on President Kennedy that he was to blame. He had his favorite poem was I Have a Rendezvous with Death, which I mentioned earlier. We all have a rendezvous with death. None of us are immortal. But they made it out to be that he just had this death wish. And it's a shame. And when Lee Harvey Oswald or conspiracy happened, this was laid on his doorstep. This is amazing. I pause this. This is more Winston Lawson. Wait till you hear, and this is one of the books I brought on, Phil Melanson's book on the Secret Service. I helped in the research of this. Phil Melanson and I picked up on this. This amazing comment. This is from 1995 Discovery Channel. Winston Lawson was interviewed. It's an amazing comment he makes what his colleagues told him after the assassination. In fact, what his reward was for his lack of protecting President Kennedy. But the comment they made to him is very disturbing. You'll hear him say it.
We had information that there had been some problems in various areas in Texas. Our position always has been we have to be in such close proximity that nothing can happen. And unfortunately, that day in Dallas, we weren't in that close proximity.
The motorcade approached. Among many other responses, Secret Service agents had to make arrangements for the security of a new president, Lyndon Johnson. For Clint Hill, guilt came later. He agonized over what he could have done differently.
Had I been there slightly sooner, I would have probably changed the guy's sight pattern. And he may not have had the same opportunity that he had without my being there.
For Win Lawson, who did the advance survey, guilt was just as bitter.
In truth, not only in my mind, I was the one and only first advance agent then and even to this day that ever lost a president with the Secret Service.
Actually, he's not the one and only first ever. David Grant, his assistant, unnamed, shares the burden, but that's one thing.
I'm sure there are many outfits, organizations where I've been fired or perhaps transferred to the boondocks, but they kept me working. I worked at President Kennedy's funeral, was near the gravesite.
As Win Lawson and Clint Hill struggled with their guilt, what the Secret Service calls its culture came into play. The culture is an internal code of ethics. The Secret Service looks after its own. But sometimes, agents have unusual ways of expressing their support.
They didn't mean it in a bad way. They would say to me, Win, if it had to happen, I'm glad it happened to you. And they really didn't mean that in a bad way. They meant that they knew that I had done everything that I could, that I had done everything that we were doing at that time. And
the perfect scenario.
Okay, now this little clip, like 5 or 10 more minutes, this is from a Discovery Channel show just from last year, about a year ago today actually. You'll see former agent Abraham Bolden, who was the first African-American member of the White House detail during JFK's time. And this is based on the book Ultimate Sacrifice. I had a hand in this too. And this wasn't on the screen, but and it shows about, okay, everybody, I'll keep talking about Dallas, but it shows that this actually was a moving crime. And the Chicago trip of November 2nd was canceled. Then you had threats to Kennedy for November 18th, the Florida trip. So Secret Service were doing their job. This was like a moving crime. That's why it's hard to believe that it was Oswald and his lucky shots when it was many prior threats. These two trips in particular, one was canceled in Chicago. They actually were lined up in the streets, as you'll hear. November 18th, 4 days before, and it's coincidental with JFK allegedly telling the agents to be out back in the car. We know it's not true from films, photos, and testimony and whatnot. And then, lo and behold, 4 days later, Oswald allegedly gets lucky, and the protection's terrible. And we're supposed to believe there was no conspiracy. We're supposed to believe the Secret Service did their job. Winston Lawson's amazing. This guys, I guess in a strained logic, I know what they meant when they said if it had to happen. I'm glad it happened to you. Terrible way of putting it, but actually he didn't do everything they could. I mean, even on prior trips, the security was infinitely better. But this is a little, I think it's like 3 or 4 minute clip from the Discovery Channel based on, this basically synthesizes this book. I highly recommend this book, by the way, Ultimate Sacrifice. It's hard to say there's one book. I'll say this, Robert Dalek's book, An Unfinished Life, is the best book I've ever read on President Kennedy's life. This is arguably, if not the best, one of the best books on the assassination. I think the problem we find ourselves in now, like I was telling Tom earlier, I think the reason why this is going to drag on forever, not just because of the mystery and the drama, and that he's, by default, is our last assassinated president, good-looking guy, who was witty, who was struck down at the prime of his life and all that. But I think the reason why it's going to go on is the good news is there's books like this that lay out evidence of conspiracy and pretty much nail down who we think did it. But people want the bottom line. They want, sound bites. Okay, cut through the red tape. Who killed Kennedy? And when you can't name the shooters, when you can't get that down and dirty, I think that's the reason why it's sort of like unsatisfying. It's like you're spinning your wheels. That's why people keep coming to it. That's why the interest is still there from the public opinion polls and the books. Vincent Bugliosi, best-selling author of Helter Skelter on the Manson case, best-selling author of Outrage and the OJ case, is coming out with a major book on the JFK case in May. I'm sure it'll be everywhere, media blitz, you won't miss it. Ironically, Abraham Bolden, the first black agent of the Secret Service White House detail, he's come out with a book with Simon Schuster in the fall. So it's always there, but this not to get, I keep getting ahead of myself anyway, I'm kind of going off my script, but that's why I think this always drags on. The good news is that there's been more inroads made in the last 5-10 years than all the years combined. But when you can't get down to naming who specifically were the shooters, and you can't prove beyond a reasonable doubt, like a legal court of law, I think that's why it's going to continue. It's not like other cases where we basically know who did it. We can argue, but, you know, other famous murder cases, you know. But this is one of those type of things. And I think it's the ramifications of being a president and the whole, how it turned history on its head and all the ramifications of the Vietnam War and all that. But anyway, this is the Discovery Channel, a little excerpt from that.
A public place, a tall structure, and an open motorcade. In November 1963, the opportunity presents itself. Not once, but 3 times.
Not only was there a likely conspiracy in Dallas to kill the president, but earlier in Tampa, Florida, and even before that in Chicago.
Mafia sharpshooters would take out the president, but the mob needs someone else to take the fall.
The reason that these 3 godfathers wanted to have a patsy involved in each one of the 3 attempts against John Kennedy in that roughly 2.5-week period there was that they wanted instantly for the attention or for the suspicion to be diverted away from them and toward Cuba.
Through their CIA and law enforcement connections, the mob learns about the men in each city most likely to arouse government suspicion, even be arrested after the president is killed. In Dallas, there's no better fall guy than Lee Harvey Oswald. In Tampa, another pro-Castro supporter, Gilberto Lopez. And in Chicago, a gun-loading ex-Marine, Thomas Arthur Valley.
There was also a Cuban connection in Valley's background. He had recently been training anti-Castro Cubans.
But only 3 days before the president's visit to Chicago, the mob loses its patsy there. Valley is caught during a traffic stop with a trunkload of rifles and ammunition. He's arrested, questioned, but never charged. The same day, there's another fatal blow to the mob's Chicago plan. Someone tips off the FBI that a team of hitmen is there, trying to assassinate the president.
There were supposed to have been 4 men in this particular conspiracy.
Secret Service agent Abraham Bolden is on detail in Chicago when the FBI contacts the field office there about the plan to kill the president. What happens next shocks Bolden.
We were told no paper trail, that all of the files, notebooks, anything pertaining to that particular case had to be turned into the special agent in charge, and we were told that case never existed.
Kennedy's trip to Chicago is called off at the last minute. The official reason? The president needs to deal with a situation in Vietnam.
This cancellation was so sudden, people were already starting to line up along the motorcade route, but the Kennedys were able to keep a lid on this threat, and so it didn't reach the press at that time.
The assassination threat is never made public. Agent Bolden later tries to contact the Warren Commission on his own. He knows his superiors will be furious.
I think the Secret Service wanted to give one story, and they didn't want to have any conflict by what that they were officially telling the Warren Commission.
But days before he's to testify, Bolden is arrested. He's later convicted for bribery and solicitation on an unrelated counterfeit case. He spends 3 years in jail.
We've gathered a fairly abundant collection of evidence that Bolden was framed. And here's a guy who was really one of the people doing a great noble job and thought he had information that was really going to help. And for this, his life is destroyed.
Why isn't there any mention of this Chicago assassination attempt in the Warren Commission report?
It does show how secret those attempts were, and that the secrecy surrounding those attempts were linked to national security concerns related to the coup plan.
Although the mafia chiefs are frustrated that their first attempt is foiled, the hasty cover-up of the threat gives them confidence to move forward with another assassination attempt only a few weeks later. But shortly before Kennedy is to arrive in Tampa, the mob's second assassination attempt begins to unravel when rumors about the hit begin to circulate.
Law enforcement confirms the plot. But with the president determined to go on with the trip, it's little consolation.
They were very concerned about a tall building, the Floridian Hotel, the tallest building in Tampa, that overlooked a hard left turn along the motorcade route. In fact, it looks very much like the School of Depository, only much taller, with many more unguarded windows.
On November 18th, the motorcade proceeds as planned. At one point, the president actually stands up in the open car.
This wasn't reckless defiance. This was Jack Kennedy cueing a potential ally in Cuba that, we are with you. I'm willing to take these kinds of risks for you. This is the kind of sacrifice I'm willing to make.
Everyone is on edge. Kennedy, police, Secret Service. What they don't know is that Mafia Chief Santo Trafficante has learned of the leak from his police mole. The assassination attempt in Tampa is called off before Kennedy even gets in the car.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
The rest of the president's trip goes as scheduled, much to the relief of the Kennedys and to the frustration of the mob. There is only one chance left to kill the president before the coup plan goes into action.
Airlines maintenance hangar, head out for downtown Dallas, where thousands should already be on the street right now, waiting for a view of the president and his wife.
Yeah. Open this up to a little Q&A in a second. I just put a couple loose ends I had to get to just to let you know something else. One of my discoveries was there were 3 separate checks to the Protective Research Section's files on potential threats to Kennedy for Dallas. I mean, we have President Kennedy himself saying we're headed into nut country now. We had Senator Fulbright, Stevenson, others warning JFK not to go to Dallas. Don't travel to Dallas, President Kennedy, whatnot. Well, we had Henry Dawes, warning Kennedy, and Kennedy telling him, don't worry, the Secret Service told me they've taken care of everything, Henry. There's nothing to worry about. Marty Underwood, Democratic National Committee man, also warned Kennedy and said, well, we're getting all these sorts of rumors. Sorry, you're going to be assassinated. He said, Marty, you worry about me too much. Well, bottom line, the Protective Research Section was a division of Secret Service that monitored threats. To this day, they're called something else in protective intelligence. Like if, God forbid, don't do it, you get 5 years in prison. If you send a letter to the White House saying, I want to kill the president and whatnot, that's it, you're done. And they check the handwriting and whatnot of letters. They check for potential threats and whatnot. Well, in Dallas, which was a rabid right-wing country, like JFK called it nut country, we had these wanted for treason mug shots that were posted along the motorcade route. We had this scurrilous welcome Mr. Kennedy ad in the Dallas Morning News. On and on and on. They find no threats at all in Dallas. And Roy Kellerman, of all people, to the Warren Commission Arms Inspector, said he found this unusual. And actually, a follow-up question was for future President Gerald Ford, who was on the Warren Commission, even said, do you find this unusual? You find no threats in Dallas? Said, yeah. You would think there would be somebody there to wish Kennedy ill, even if not dead, just something. They found nothing at all. 3 checks there. Well, you might say, well, that's a shame, and maybe that's a coincidence of history, or just like a negligent thing and whatnot. The thing that's amazing is that November 9th, Joseph Miltier, it was on one of the episodes of The Men Who Killed Kennedy, one of the early ones. He came on, and there's an audio tape of it where he's hearing of a threat to kill the president, and they're alluding like it's going to be in Miami from November 18th. And JFK is going to be killed, an office window, a building, a high-powered rifle, on and on and on. The very next day, November 10th, this is my discovery now, Glenn Bennett, who was a PRS agent, was temporarily assigned to the White House detail and started riding in the follow-up car from that point on. This is an administrative desk job type of agent, and he's riding in the follow-up car. Gets worse. These are documents now that have been released only in the late 90s. We're talking like 98, 99. He lied to the House Select Committee and said that I wasn't on the Florida trip. Not only was he on the Florida trip, he was on the New York trip, which was the major trip before the Florida trip, and all the major stops riding in the follow-up car. And even in official reports that have been known about since 1964, it says, like some of the conspiracies, that Glenn Bennett had to be reminded to work the follow-up car on the movement being the motorcade itself. And he's one of the agents that drank the night before, and he's also obviously one of the agents that Kennedy's killed before his eyes, and he's not a protective agent. What's he doing in the follow-up car? Well, the thing that I think is pretty obvious is he was there to monitor this plot in progress. He was there to monitor this mortal threat or threats to the president, and it was covered up after the fact, his role in this. Spoke to several of his colleagues, and they all said on the one hand, it was kind of strange for Glenn to have been there. Maybe he was some sort of protective intelligence liaison. The fine print is that didn't happen until officially after November 22nd, the recommendations of the Warren Commission. Officially, this stuff didn't happen before. In fact, even Bert DeFries, one of the agents testified to the House Select Committee, it was rare for an agent of PRS to accompany us into the field. I think rare was translation, never. But here's Glenn Bennett again riding on all the trips now. Bennett again riding on all the trips now. And it gets even worse than this. You get a protective survey report that only came out in the late 90s. And this isn't exactly, even though this stuff came out, it's not like you could just walk around, oh, there it is. You have to order the documents, you have to pay the money, you have to know what you're looking for. They come from the archives, photocopies, sometimes they're not very good, whatnot. And I got this, it was a protective survey report for Kennedy's trip to Austin that he didn't live to see for the next day. Lo and behold, scribbled underneath is Howard K. Norton. Like, oh, who's Howard K. Norton? Turns out he's a protective intelligence agent himself. He's there. And then I talked to his colleagues, it gets worse. At least they admit about Glenn Bennett as being an agent, a human being. They just don't know what he's there for. One after another, they're saying, I don't remember Howard Norton. I don't remember him. One of them was Frank Yeager, who assisted in the advance of Austin. He's claiming total amnesia. It gets worse. I actually wrote to the current Secret Service, got an email, not just letters in his email, from the Assistant Director of Public Affairs, George Rogers, saying that we have no record of a Howard K. Norton at any tenure dates he has. And the former, the Executive Secretary of the former agents of the Secret Service, used to be Hamilton Brown, now it's Don Stebbins, wrote to me and said, you know what, Vince, in order to be eligible to be a member in good standing of the former agents of the Secret Service, you had to be an agent for at least 1 year, and we're a very active organization, and we have no record of a Howard K. Norton, but there's no doubt there's a Howard K. Norton, because there's a prior protective survey report in Florida, well, things should have led into that he was on that trip. One of his colleagues, Dale Wunderlich, even admitted that he was an agent, and he actually found the resonance cavity in the seal that was planted in the Russian ambassador's office. It was a big scandal in like the early 60s. So this guy definitely existed. He definitely was a PRS agent, protective agent. Like Glenn Bennett, you have them there covertly. You have these guys denying their presence, at least, if not their presence, their specific duties. And we're supposed to believe it was Oswald all by himself, and we're supposed to believe that there was no moving crime, and we're supposed to believe the Secret Service did not do these things, and it's just all some sort of coincidence. But again, it brings me back to square one. I do have a hard time believing that, oh, the Secret Service plot, and come on, you know, I don't go that far. I'm kind of just somewhere in between. To this day, I still have a hard time with it myself. I just have what these guys told me, numerous corroborations. It's not just like one guy hanging out in the breeze there, and oh, you got to take one scene how guys work for it. You got one after another after another. You have it in writing, you have it on audio tape. Sometimes you have it, inadvertently on video. Some of these guys said stuff on, some of these news broadcasts. But anyway, just to summarize and put it all in a bow, I guess that's basically what it boils down to. It's like an innocent interest in President Kennedy and sidebars in the Secret Service. I never thought, no axe to grind, I would uncover some of the things I've uncovered. And even the whole thing about Greer. How many times people have seen this Greer film? And I've had so many seasoned researchers told me, now they know about it because of my stuff. Back in the early 90s, people come to me, Vince, I never even looked at Bill Greer. I was too busy looking at Kennedy. I never noticed the fact he looked back not once but twice. And you got the testimony that Roy Kellerman told him, yeah, I lied. And he later said that Bill Greer looked in the back of the car and maybe he didn't believe me and corroborating all this. And it's taken all these years. It took an amateur like me with just an interest. I mean, do what I did. It was just my own dime, just the cost of a phone call and a letter and find these guys' curiosity to cover what I've uncovered. So that's it. Thanks.
Mr. Palamara, is it okay if we open it up?
Oh, yeah. Say anything you want.
Please, are there questions?
Yeah, there's one here I want to ask. Recently, you may have heard that Howard Hunt died. And
I actually didn't know he just passed away.
Yeah, did you know that? Well, anyway, his book, he was apparently going to write a book, or had a book that was about to expose the fact that there were rogue agents in the CIA that were behind, in his view, of the killing of Kennedy. But that the book was published and they took out the passage about that.
That was recent
Wow.
in the newspaper.
I did not. I knew that Howard Hunt was got to be well into his 80s. He was a Watergate burglar, the Nixon thing. Howard Hunt. Man, he wrote a lot of books. He wrote like Give Us This Day and a whole bunch of books. I don't know if he ever used a pen name. A, I did not know he passed away. And B, that's amazing. I know. Now, David Atlee Phillips, who was a high official in the CIA, right before he died, he admitted in 1988 he believed that rogue elements of the CIA were involved in Kennedy's death were up to and including that point. He thought conspiracy people were nuts and there was no truth in Oswald acting alone. It's amazing. People say that, oh, all these years later, people, no one's come forward and talked. There actually has been people that talk. It's just the media doesn't report it. Or if they report it, they ridicule it. It's like one of those type of things, like the 1-2 punch. They'll admit it, then they'll throw something into monkey wrench. Like, oh, this person was incredible for blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, Hunt was apparently claimed that he was asked to be part of it and rejected it. So
I learned something. I had no idea that.
I have a hard time believing he rejected it.
That was in the press yesterday, that article on him.
Oh, was it? Okay.
It also said that the hit was supposed to take place in Miami, and Lyndon Johnson changed it to Dallas because he could control security there. And it seems
I had
like...
no idea. This you're telling me something new.
Yeah,
I had no idea.
That was in the article yesterday in the Post-Gazette.
Wow, what am I doing, man? I'm sitting there doing research. I'm missing this stuff over the counter, man.
If it had been in today, I'd have it in my briefcase out in the truck.
Hey, that's how I'm like, here I'm calling all these guys all over the world, and there's something right in my local press, and I miss it. Hey, that is
Well, I've
amazing.
got a question. Every time Johnson sort of alluded to, all of a sudden, it's dropped real quick, like the History Channel had a show.
Oh, well,
and
I was part of
before
that.
you get to see it, they yanked it, and you can't even buy a copy of it now. I've never seen it.
Tell you something about that. I was part of that. Like I said earlier, the little anecdote I told you that he filmed me for 16 hours, and I got 3.5 minutes, and all that everybody else got 3.5 minutes. Other than, the crazy lady from Part 8 who thought she's Oswald's girlfriend. See, that's what kills us. He got this cowboy stuff that kills it, the lunatic fringe. But anyway, Part 9, the Bar McClellan thing, Bar McClellan doing the LBJ did it, Blood, Money, and Power. That episode was really strong. What happened was, because it showed all these years later, Ruffalo and Feathers, you had Lady Bird Johnson, President Carter, former President Gerald Ford at the time, and Bill Moyers, and a whole bunch of people, Joseph Califano, wrote to the History Channel and got them to put, wrote to the History Channel and said, please put some sort of addendum at the beginning saying that, these are the many theories of the History Channel. They did that. That wasn't good enough. They actually had them taken away. The reason why they had them taken away, and I got this from 2 customer service reps at the History Channel that I called the time. The DVD sold 50,000 copies at $39.95 a piece. It was the biggest seller in their history, and it was like the #1 rated show at the time. They showed it 4 times, my little episode at the time. In fact, it's still being shown in Great Britain. But they took it out in April of 2004. It aired in November of 2003. And I think someone mentioned that. It's on YouTube now. Yeah. I hate the way I look at it, but that's another story. But anyway, So it goes to show the power. All these years later, the political thing, they actually stopped the show first. And then we talked about this earlier. Then they had Robert Dallek and some seasoned historians coming out to refute it. Like, really? And they didn't actually analyze the evidence. They just basically dismissed it in a big, this is lunatic fringe. LBJ had nothing to do with all. Ironically, Lyndon Johnson, he had a little pull with the news media. This came out in 1992 on a Dan Rather show, 48 Hours. That LBJ, it's on film. You don't have to take Dan Rather's word for it. He's controversial himself. Here's Lyndon Johnson saying that others other than Oswald probably were involved. I was like, whoa. Well, he had Bill Paley, the head of the CBS at the time, pull that film, but luckily on the video version of this 48 Hours, they show the clip. It's like, wow, there's President Johnson's a few years where he died admitting, and later on he said, we were operating a murder incorporated in the Caribbean, the CIA mafia plots, and he always alluded to something else other than Oswald, but again, the whole official history is, I guess it is why nothing's black and white. Actually, official history's up in here. We got the Warren Commission saying Oswald did it, but then we got the House Select Committee in the 70s saying Oswald did it with probably a friend, and there was a probable conspiracy of unknown origin, probably originating with organized crime. Then we had the Assassination Records Review Board in the late 90s because of the Oliver Stone film. It's the power of a movie. That 3-hour Oliver Stone gem, for all its problems, it got people writing to their congressmen. They were like outraged. Oh my God, all these files are going to be sealed to the year 2027. This is now 1991 when the movie came out. And because of the power of motion picture, I'm going to show you, people don't read books, but boy, they saw a movie, they're like, oh, I'm going to write to my congressman. And that got George Bush the first, one of his final acts, to sign the law, the JFK Records Act. Bill Clinton finally signed into the Assassination Records Review Board, which released millions of documents that never once saw the light of day until 2027. And some of those documents I was referring to were some of the ones I got about the survey reports, about the role of Glenn Bennett, on and on and on. If I wouldn't have had those, I would have been swinging out here like, well, you got to take my word for it, or just one guy told me this. I got the corroboration from these documents. But the problem is, either the media doesn't report it, or they ridiculed it, or it's really the passage of time we're handicapped. I mean, it's the post 9/11 days we live in. It's the new millennium. I understand there's only so much emotional impact you can get into. Unless you were, I mean, it's ironic. I wasn't even born when it happened, but unless you were of that time, it's really hard to get an emotional feeling behind it. It's almost getting from current events to history. It's so kind of handicapped by time, but it's also the media too, what they choose to report.
I can give you an update. Woody Harrelson's father died, and he was connected with that in a roundabout way.
Isn't that bizarre?
That was in today's paper.
Yeah, I did not know he died, but I did know about Woody. Yeah, it's a bizarre connection there. Woody Harrelson, who starred in Cheers and other movies. His dad was alleged to be, Mike, the second time. He was alleged to be one of the 3 tramps that were in Dallas that day who saw the Stone movie and whatnot. In fact, actually, Woody Harrelson's dad, he was in one of the Men Who Killed Kennedy episodes.
Right.
One of the early ones.
Other questions? I saw some hands in the back, please.
The question I have is, I saw a story where John Conley and his wife both said that they smelled gun smoke when they were passing the grassy knoll. And they were never asked about it, and they never testified to it. And also, why was the bullet that was in John Conley's wrist never taken out? He was buried with that in there.
Yeah,
and that would completely discredit that pristine bullet theory.
Well, what happened with that? Well, the first part of your thing is, I wasn't sure. I didn't know that it was the Conleys that smelled gunpowder, which obviously sounds like it's from the knoll, because here's the book deposit up here. How could the smoke get all the way down to ground level that soon? But there was Ralph Yarborough and several other witnesses, one Secret Service agent, Rufus Youngblood, who did smell gunpowder on that street level within seconds, mere seconds of the shooting, which leads the shots came from the front of the grassy knoll. I wasn't aware it was the Conleys necessarily, but to follow up on your point, because now 1993 was 14 years ago, but still relatively current, more or less. When John Conley passed away in June of '93, a ham-fisted thing researchers did. I'm not exactly sure. Actually, maybe Dr. Wecht was one of them. Actually, good intention but bad timing to get those fragments. It was during the funeral that they actually had some sort of parley or whatnot, saying, "Is there any way? I'm sorry for your bereavement, blah blah. Can we get these fragments for neutron activation test?" They're like, "You've got to be kidding me! I mean, this is our beloved, husband, father, when he's passed away." And if they just would have done it in a better, tasteful way, they would have. But Nellie Conley, who's since passed away, at the time said, "No way, that's it." Now, the good news on that is, both Nellie and John Conley, even though they more or less believe Oswald acted alone, they always had this weird thing that they do not believe the single bullet theory. They do not believe that Conley was struck by the same bullet and as Kennedy. And the thing I didn't get a chance to show you, that near the end, there were some clips from ABC TV, and the doctor, Dr. Robert Shaw, says during this press conference, this is several hours after the assassination, saying the bullet has not been removed, the bullet's in the leg, it's not life-threatening, we'll remove it, we'll get to it eventually. But yet, according to official history, that bullet had to have been on the stretcher and found as the single bullet in the single bullet theory, but here it is, several hours later, in Connolly's leg. Something doesn't jive there, so we can get beyond all that. That's a pristine bullet, how could it look like that? Didn't have any blood on it, yada, yada, yada. But if it's still on the leg, according to this, the chief surgeon telling you this on live TV November 22nd. So they show you that's why there's always little things come up. I did not know that about Connolly specifically. I knew about Yarborough and about half a dozen other people, but I'll have to check into that. I did not know that they were on that list.
Other questions?
Yeah.
I have a couple different questions.
Good.
The Secret Service that protects the president, are they also in charge of protecting the current vice president at the time?
Yeah, well, there's the White House detail now called Presidential Protective Division, PPD. They have a separate division. They're all connected because one protects the president, one protects the vice president, but they don't do the same thing at the same time unless they're transferred. Now you got the guys in the field offices that do protect the president and the vice president and our currency. Like for example, like in Pittsburgh, we have a Pittsburgh field office, okay? And the Secret Service, or the president comes there, then you'll have a contingent that normally checks on counterfeiting and fraud investigations. They'll go check. No, when Kennedy was killed, Lyndon Johnson, as vice president, had his own protective people, like Rufus Youngblood and some of the people in his follow-up car behind. And they, out of just necessity, combined with JFK's former White House detail. So it went from like 36 agents up to like 50 or more.
But some of those same agents, they stayed on.
Oh yeah, quite a few of them did, yeah.
Okay. Well, I guess, like what my thing is, I believe that hard left that they took, that's when our country took a hard left also. And, however you want to put it. And when he made that left, whether the bullet had hit him in the head or not, Johnson was president at that time in my eyes. Now, what that means, who knows? I don't know how much he actually had to do with it, but just seeing different things on YouTube, books and things like that. It's amazing. You think about it, who had the most to gain, and that's one thing. Dr. Piercy, he said that the very first day, who had the most to gain from this, and the two guys were Hoover and they were Johnson, and it just, I don't know, it seems to me like, he had his hand in the cookie jar, and if, you said five agents said that JFK ordered them off the motorcade. Well, who were those 5 agents taking orders from on November 23rd, or after that? They're taking orders from Lyndon Johnson.
Well, one of the funny things is, one of them, Emory Roberts of the 5, he immediately switched allegiance to Johnson, and Dave Powers and Kenny O'Donnell, was a setup question, your question, you didn't know. When the book came out in 1973, Kenny O'Donnell and Dave Powers basically almost tried to hide the disgust that Emory Roberts switched to Johnson as soon as Kennedy was shot. We know that Kennedy's first shot was fatal. It's almost like he's like saying so many words. He switched it. And Chief Curry in his book, James Hepburn, a couple of people, and William Manchester of all people, the Oswald Did It writer of the 60s came out and even basically shows that there was a switch of allegiance. And so to answer your question, not only did they out of necessity become LBJ agents when JFK was killed, some of them were a little quick on the trigger finger, so to speak, to show that allegiance. One of them is Emory Roberts, the agent who stood up in the car, orders Henry Ripka not to move. And during the shooting, I don't know if you missed it, there was a little voiceover in that, when I'm talking to the man who killed Kennedy, and it's near the end of the clip, when he also ordered the men not to move when the shooting began. And how that came about was a total accident. I thought it was a misstatement. Harry Livingstone wrote High Treason, also wrote other books, but High Treason is the first one. And there's a statement there that says that Emory Roberts ordered the men not to move. And I'm like, that's something of a misstatement. So I wrote, Emory Roberts passed away in 1973. Sam Kinney was alive at the time. He died in 1997. I spoke to him 3 times back in the early 90s. And I ran that by him. And again, it's one of those type of things, I'm actually waiting for him to say, there's no truth to that. He goes, exactly right. I'm involved in that too. He said, I just swerved the car, blah, blah, blah. And he's basically saying, Emory Roberts isn't here to defend himself. And that's exactly right. That's exactly right. He ordered the men not to move. Emory Roberts is one of the only agents that recognized the first shot as a shot, where most of the agents is pathetic. They were like the untrained civilians that thought the first shot was a firecracker or a motorcycle backfire. Whereas trained agents should know, oh my God, it's a gunshot, and react. Well, Emory Roberts, was one of the few that recognized the gunshot as a gunshot, and yet ordered the men not to move. No overt action. He's recalling Ripken at Love Field, and John Redding on the other side takes like a forward step, and Vane what's all over it. And Clint Hill, in my opinion, was hamstrung by the early orders, and he hears that probably out of the corner of his ear. And Emory Roberts, the commander of the fog car, he's his boss, but he's actually in charge of that fog car. They had 8 agents in it, and 2 presidential aides. So you got it. It's a matter of seconds, I know, but when you see other past presidential attempts on like the life of Gerald Ford twice, FDR when he was president-elect, Harry Truman in 1950, obviously, Ronald Reagan. That video is dramatic. In March of '81, they only had X amount of seconds too, and yet they were on like crazy. In fact, actually faster than that Zapruder film. So the skeptics might say, that's only 7 seconds. Well, in Secret Service, every second, if they were there, there's a close proximity issue. But them not being there on or near the car and the motorcycles and everything else I laid out, that's what it is. That's a long-winded way of saying, yes, they combine the 2 details.
With all the controversy that still remains regarding the forensic and ballistic evidence in the case, can you give us a sense of who's in charge of collecting the evidence at the hospital and the car, preserving that evidence, maintaining custody until it was passed on, and throughout the course of your interviews with these Secret Service agents, did they impart any discrepancies that they noted later?
Yes, big one. Well, I tell you what, the short answer is the Secret Service, like I said, alluded to earlier about the production of JFK and planning and Texas trip, they were the ones that had the evidence. They were the first hands, literally, on that evidence. The presidential limousine, bullet fragments, the skull particles, as gory as that is, that's still forensic evidence. It shows, the path of bullet, entrance make small holes, exits make large holes, blood spatter pattern, etc., etc. Well, and a specific thing would be Sam Kinney, who's flying back on the C-130 transport plane. Now, this only came out through an interview with me. I have it on audio tape, and ironically, later on, House Select Committee documents released in the late 90s, and he alluded to it in there. He said while he was on the C-130 transport plane that day, coming back from Love Field on the way to Washington in the middle of the night, he goes back, and one of the Air Force guys plays out, I'm sick, I can't be back there. It is terrible, all the blood in the back of the car. Can you go back there, Sam, and relieve me, so to speak? Well, I can't be back. Sam goes back there. He finds the back part of the president's head. I didn't get into that too much, but you heard that real in passing. Here's Clint Hill. He's in testimony and in reports saying the back of the head was gone. Well, that's got to be a shot from the front. Small hole, big hole, right rear of the head. Where's Sam Kinney? Matter of fact, he believed there was a conspiracy, but he thought Oswald was the only shooter, kind of incongruously. But he said, oh yeah, I found the back part of the president's head in the rear seat of the limousine. I spoke to him twice to get to some of my researcher friends in the medical. I said, Vince, you've got to nail him down. It could be semantics. Did he really mean the side or this? Trying to nail him down. He said, oh, it was like clean as a pin. It was like a flower pot. I don't know what else it could have been in the back of the head. Then I was like, well, did you realize, blah, blah, blah. So, well, I'm just telling you what I saw. It was in the back of the head. He put in a phone patch to Dr. Berkeley, which was JFK's physician. He was the only medical person at Parkland and Bethesda. Put a phone patch for the skull fragment. He said he never knew what happened to it. That one of, I think it was specific names, it was Tommy Mills, which was one of Dr. Berkeley's aides, got the fragment. But yet, when we get to the autopsy, the late arriving fragments, there's all sorts of incongruities. Like one time it's like 2 fragments arrived, one time it's 1 fragment. Some of the medical doctors say it was from the back of the head. In the 70s, it came out that some of them identified it as occipital bone, which is the back of the head, and other ones, no, it was parietal, which is like ambiguous. Is it the size of the back? So the short answer is Secret Service had control of all that evidence to begin with, and the specific is, yeah, that came out just very recently. They were the first in the chain of command. You talk about preserving the crime scene and whatnot, and again, whether you believe Oswald did or no conspiracy or not, you talk about everything was so muddy. Even before Oswald was shot by Ruby, just the handling of the evidence was horrible. That was a moving crime scene, a crime scene on wheels. But they took the limousine away, washed it out. It was another horrible thing.
Whose idea was that, Vince? The bucket of water at Parkland Hospital.
Yeah, ironically, I was in the pictures that Sam Kinney and the aforementioned Glenn Bennett, or the 2 agents that give us some third time. Yeah, they were the agents that were by the car.
Scrubbing the car.
Yeah. And I couldn't nail down who told you to do that or whatnot. Now, I don't think they would have did that on their own volition because they were into following orders. And what I tried to get from, now I got to admit this is my fault. I should have followed up with this a little more, but hindsight's 20/20. I couldn't think of everything to ask these guys. You keep on a stranger on the phone at the time, asking these guys questions. Lucky they didn't hang up with me, so you go for what you can. You don't remember everything you can say. But from what I read from William Manchester, who, by the way, did interview a lot of the agents back in 64, 65, it sounds like it was Roy Kellerman who was at the hospital who basically said, take custody of the limousine. I think some of these guys automatically said, let's wash this out before we put the fabric top on and send it back to Love Field to go on C-130. But yeah,
great idea. A car wash. Let's run it through there.
It was before the shot was ever fired too. If they were behind it and they were connected to it, who's to say that, okay, once the hit is done, you guys take charge of the limousine, you guys take it, you guys clean it up.
You're pretty conspiratorial.
Yeah. That's good. I don't know. But another thing, I was talking about that moving crime thing about the Chicago and the Florida trip, and about Glenn Bennett and Howard Norton, my discoveries about them being on the trip and their protected research agents and whatnot. Another gem that I got from Gerald Bain, I told you about the fact, early on I said that he was the agent, he was in charge of the White House detail. The number 1 agent is telling me President Kennedy never told us to be off the back of the car, and he was a nice man, and all those agents corroborated him. He also told me another golden nugget, which was unbelievable. He told me that the motorcade route was changed in Dallas. I got this all on audio tape too, so you don't have to take my word for this. Any of that. I got lots either on audio tape, on emails, letters, whatnot. But anyway, so when the motorcade was changed, I almost like fell off. In September 27, 92 is the day I lived in it for me for reasons of research. And I followed up and said, "Oh, do you know why it was changed?" He goes, "Well, I know it was changed, but why? I've forgotten completely. I don't know." And during the House Select Committee days, and these documents only came out in the late 90s, they interviewed him at the motorcade route. And he was really on the inside because being the head of the White House detail, even though he wasn't there in Dallas, which is another story in itself. He was in the behind the scenes of the planning in the early stages. So that's what it's all about the chain of command. It's all about the fact that a lot of third stringers were there, inexperienced guys. I made that analogy. I always make an analogy. It's like the Super Bowl. Imagine going to the Super Bowl and you got a bunch of third stringers, bench warmers. You don't got your starting quarterback, your starting right guard, on and on, running back. It doesn't make any sense, and especially, and it wasn't just any old city. It was a city that JFK was warned about. Then you have the normal procedures not even invoked. And again, you're asked to believe it was Oswald, and I always do this. I never get this, but every once in a while in private conversations, people try to throw out, well, if it was Oswald, there's no conspiracy. I said, good. Have him in the window alone, there's no conspiracy. These guys would have prevented that. If anything, in a way, they're almost more guilty of the conspiracy because they would have just had the rearward shots, and that would have been it. So.
Yeah, I can't seem to figure out that even if the Secret Service was there, even if the motorcycle patrols were on the side, how would that have stopped the shot from the front in the neck, and also the fatal shot to the head from goes on
the
front right? I mean, I don't see how, even if there were a Secret Service on the side, that there's no way they would have stopped that shot to the neck.
Oh, that's short answer. The first shot, no. There's nothing they could do about that. So if it would have been a lucky shot or an 8 higher, then no, there wouldn't have been a leg to stand on. The crucial thing is the medical doctors, like I said earlier, said that he would have survived that first one. It was the fatal shot several seconds later was the kill shot. So if they would have been there, more importantly than the motorcycle officers, because there's a little wiggle room there, that's mainly more to keep the spectators away, but you could also offer the caveat that they were there, and there would have been more trained officers to have witnessed stuff, because as we know, a lot of the Dallas police officers later came forward, said shots were from the front, they ran into another issue, phony Secret Service agents behind the knoll, and that's a whole other issue there. But to answer specifically what they could have done, if agents would have been on or near the rear of the limousine, they would have been able to cover Kennedy. If they would have been standing there or standing behind and that first shot ran out, they would have had time to cover him before the fatal shot would have made its mark. So the agents would have been able to prevent that shot. Yeah. Well, the Secret Service this day always says, the advantage goes to the shooter, paraphrasing, on the first shot. They just know that it's basically a sentence of death if anybody tries to do anything to the president because they're not going to live. They're basically going to be taken out themselves. So the advantage is always the first strike, and they try to prevent a first strike from happening. Protective intelligence, making sure the nuts are checked on in the cities and nothing's going to happen, and making sure there's good security to not prevent a situation from happening in the first place. Now, I haven't said that if something gets through, like John Hinckley in 1981, all that perimeter security, he got through, he didn't even have a press packet, he was in there, he was obsessed with Jodie Foster, so I wanted to shoot Reagan. And he had a gun on him, and so when Reagan came out, he was able to get those first shots, hit James Brady out, but they were able to cover and evacuate from that point, so he actually hit Tim McCarthy, one of the agents, in the stomach. So I guess the short answer would be not the motorcycle officers, but the agents, and the first shot's always the advantage of the shooter. The Secret Services and the Dallas Police augmenting are trying to prevent that from happening in the first place by limiting the scenarios of weaknesses along that way.
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out, what was really the motive for the Secret Service having a part in the assassination? Because, I don't know, it just seems like you don't kill someone for being a womanizer. It just seems kind of like a loose...
Yeah, well, like I said, in the interest of time, I got like a few other points on that, but basically, I don't know if I can go through that. But yeah, see, you know what it is? It boils down to is I have a hard time myself believing that the agents were sinisterly involved. That's why I think a great caveat. I don't want to get to, like I started out, oh, step right up. This is Vince Palamara's lecture on the Secret Service killed Kennedy. No, it's not that cut and dry. I'm saying that the scenario was conspiracy, no conspiracy. They didn't do certain things, and they did do certain things that set Kennedy up, and they blamed Kennedy after the fact for these actions. It turns out not to be true, and then we're left with the $64 million question. Well, then, if they left Kennedy as a sitting duck, so to speak, they're blaming Kennedy, it's turned out not to be true. Well, there's got to be some sort of third answer. You take the sinister line, which I agree with you, I don't find credible either. I'm just offering, and I have several other ideas on the matter, but one of the big things is about the mores, social mores at the time. These guys, and this actually only came out in the late 90s, as you see. It was basically a revelation. These guys were appalled at his his social life, sexual escapades and whatnot, and if they felt that way, would it be either subliminal or direct way of thinking of stand down for a couple seconds, we don't like this guy. I was telling Tom Royce that when we were at the restaurant, Royce, that Ron Williams, the head of Los Angeles office, quit the Secret Service after like 2 decades because he was disgusted with President Clinton. He didn't want to protect them, so he actually wrote an op-ed thing in the early 90s saying, I don't want to protect this man. His morals, and he disgusts me and that. There's other evidence of that too, like Marty Venker and Dennis McCarthy came out with books in the 80s saying that sometimes you often wonder, like, do I really want to step in front of a bullet for this guy? They don't say specifically who they're talking about, but like, it's food for thought that it could have been, loaded. But there's some other things too, like one of the things is there was FBI and Secret Service feuding that went on for a lot of years, and there was a House Resolution 4158, so I'm giving you the specifics on that, and it was Robert Kennedy, JFK's brother and Attorney General, was trying to change the procedures for selecting the agents, specific agents would guard JFK, and James Riley actually protested that, was still protesting the Warren Commission his testimony, and this is after Kennedy's killed, and in 1964 the bill was killed. But the whole thing was, and Abraham Goldman in conversations to me corroborated this too, the do was an act under fire that basically usurped the Secret Service's responsibility to specifically choose, who the agents were going to protect Kennedy. And again, it's just food for thought. It could be another item on the docket of another potential reason for these guys to be, for lack of a better way to put it, mad at Kennedy because he's trying to take away our whole. Wait, he's going to pick who protects us. Like James Riley even said earlier, said no president will tell the Secret Service what they can or cannot do. He testified to that as well. So that's why I still to this day have trouble with it. I show what I show and what these guys have to say. And still, I don't have a clear-cut answer for it. It's tough.
I think that Hoover thought that JFK was a security risk because he was having an affair with Judith Exner, who was also having an affair with Sandy Buchanan.
Mafia, Chicago, yeah. See, that's a whole other thing here, like the whole specifics about the CIA mafia plots and the national security apparatus. The Secret Service knew about not only JFK's dalliances, they knew about all the national security affairs because they ran, everybody talks about Nixon's taping system, but JFK had his taping system. Robert Bob was head of the Protective Research Section. That's common knowledge now. JFK taped his telephone calls, had hidden microphones at his desk, and the Secret Service was in charge of that. Again, food for thought. They were not only aware of his dalliances, and they were disgusted by that, at least contingent of them were, they also knew about some of the controversial things he was doing with the mob and the CIA and all that, and plotting to overthrow Castro. And there's a thing about Diem, the president of Vietnam, was killed November 1st, 63. So yeah, and Hoover, the whole battle of Hoover. Speaking of Hoover, Hoover was trying to take over the Secret Service in the late 40s. He wanted, Harry Truman wrote a letter to his wife Beth saying Hoover would give his right eye to take over the Secret Service. So there's all these interagency battles there. So,
Head back here. We were talking in class one time about one of the nurses at Parkland. She saw a bullet hole in the windshield. And was there any, did the Secret Service in the front of the vehicle ever mention that?
Yeah, you're talking about Velia Glangis. She's the one from Men Who Killed Kennedy. I got a letter from her too. She just saying what she said on the show. Yeah, some of the agents, a lot of couldn't nail them down. Some said that there was a hole. Some said it was merely a crack. Some said there was a crack on the front of the glass. Safety glass shatters in the opposite fashion, so you don't know if it's a front shot or a rear shot. So I guess, again, the short answer would be there's a lot of, it wasn't a clear-cut answer. I mean, like Sam Kinney, the driver of the fog car, who later took over the limousine and drove it back to the C-130 transport plane and actually saw the windshield. He said that there was a spidering crack on the front, and researchers have been going back and forth with this. On one side, like I said earlier, safety glass, it acts in the opposite fashion. You would think normally if you shot a baby through a pane of glass, it would react a certain way, but safety glass acts the opposite way. They were saying the way Sam's describing that spidering hole bit, it sounds like he's talking about a shot from the front. But there's actually a Secret Service report from Harry Gegling and Charles Taylor. I don't know if I'm pronouncing Harry Gegling right, but he actually says there was a small hole in the center of the windshield. So that would allude to a shot from the front, because official history was there was no hole at all there. So, and again, this came through the Secret Service's door. They were the first lens, so to speak, capturing all that evidence, and then later on we find several months later. In fact, Roy Kellerman testified to the Warren Commission, our own inspector again, and he said that our inspector was made this. This windshield feels different to you than it did in November. He says, yes, it does, and the matter was dropped, but no follow-up never is.
Why was the year 2027 chosen as the date, if you will, to release? Because I was 7 years old when this happened. I remember it vividly. And the only reason that I can see is that everyone that would be alive from that point would be deceased by the time the truth comes out.
Part of it's that, and part of it was 50 years from 1977. Yes, 50 years? Yeah, something like that. Bad on that. That's pathetic. Anyway, but and that was like a House rule, congressional rule about the records, at least of the House Select Committee, for putting that year. Now, there's a little bit of a difference. Like the Warren Commission records might have been 2017. So it's in between, but the records have been really good in the House Select Committee, and they were until 2027, and that was a 50-year proviso. So thank God for that. Oliver Stone movie, all his fault. It wasn't that movie. We wouldn't see those documents, so we would just have a small. We'd have theories. We wouldn't have the facts and the documents and that. And any day, it's still tough. It's like almost like hieroglyphics. You've got to go through. You've got to corroborate things. Yeah, but that's a lot of people tell me, they just want to make sure we're all dead because they don't come out.
It sure would seem that way. I mean, if I was alive at the time, I'd be 71, 72 years old. If I was 7 when this happened.
Yeah. Well, one thing I want to add, this is amazing. Jacqueline Kennedy gave oral history testimony to the JFK Library, and these tapes are not to come out until 50 years after her last sibling, unfortunately JFK Jr. died tragically in 99, so it's Caroline. 50 years after she dies, her tapes are going to be coming out. Now, it makes you think, we can't prove it, but if Oswald did and there's no conspiracy and there's nothing to it, why is she waiting all those years? Everybody knows about JFK fooling around, so it couldn't be that. What could be so dynamite on these tapes that she didn't want them released and put that proviso on? I mean, even William Manchester, the author of The Death of the President, who spoke to a lot of people, including Jacqueline Kennedy, a lot of Secret Service agents, etc., etc. A lot of those tapes, when I talked to him back in '93, he was real cantankerous. All those notes and tapes will be under seal, won't be released in your lifetime and all that. He's since passed away, so I don't know if his estate's going to release them. So there's still, all these years later, there's still things that are tied up that we still don't know, and you still have years and years to come out. I think what it is, it's like now, Now, a lot of things I'm talking about now, if this would have been even 10 years ago or 20 years ago, they'd have more of an impact, but you got years have passed, and it's going from current events to history, it dulls the emotions, and by the time, it could be dynamite stuff that comes out, but you're going to have more and more years of this going to just kill the emotion of it, and I think that's part of the reason why. It's just, there's probably, I'm speculating there's something dynamite in those tapes, the reason why the Jacqueline Kennedy tapes are being released. But.
So my students need to keep this topic alive. If you have other questions, please.
Oh, I was just pump fisting your...
Yeah. Other questions?
In regards to the press corps, how common was it for them to ride in front of the presidential motorcade?
Very common.
And then, but that day, so it was very bizarre that they were relegated to the back of the motorcade.
Very bizarre. So that's the thing. It wasn't just like, oh, this is isolated incidents, and you're trying to make it like, oh, every once in a while it becomes all the time. Tom Dillard, Dallas Morning News, and he was on C-SPAN and testified at the Warren Commission, said that they were canceled last minute. And I thought, well, could have just been the Texas trip, maybe it was other trips. And I checked into it, lo and behold, even just the angles of the film from the JFK Library and all the documents, I'm thinking, oh my God, there is the flatbed truck, and it's always in front. Then, well, I didn't get into this. It was alluded to by Professor Fetzer that in 1995, a whole bunch of survey reports were shredded by the Secret Service after they were asked to be sent to AARB. But in the ones that have survived, they all said there's a flatbed truck in front of the presidential limousine, still on motion photographers. So yes, they normally rode there, and we wouldn't need Abraham Zapruder, and it probably would have solved a whole bunch. You would have had not just the witnesses trained, eyes and ears. We would have had all that still in motion photography that wasn't there. So.
Who in the Secret Service, under whose authority were they relegated to the back of the motorcade? Like, who gave the order?
Well, what it boils down to, it came from Floyd Boring, who was the number 2 guy of the White House detail, second in charge, who was planner. I didn't get into this too much because I kind of deviated from my script. He was in charge of planning the Texas trip, even though he wasn't physically there. The third stringer was Roy Kellerman. the order was funneled down to Emery Roberts, who was in charge of the follow-up car. So he funneled the order directly to the agents on the follow-up car, but the order specifically came from Floyd Boring. And the amazing thing, again, that's what I hearken to. That's basically the smoking gun was. In fact, that, the official history is Kennedy didn't want the agents there, and supposedly Floyd Boring ordered them based on Kennedy's order. I got Floyd Boring himself adamantly on tape twice telling me there's no truth. That President Kennedy was a nice man. He never interfered with our actions at all. There's no truth. I nailed him down. You sure there wasn't exceptions? No. This happened on the Florida trip? No. So it's amazing. And then all his colleagues said the same thing. It's not like there's like a couple flies in the ointment that, no, he did, Vince. I'm like, oh boy, there's some guys that are saying he did. They're all saying the same thing. They're using the same verbiage. He never interfered with our actions. He was a nice man. I started out with that human interest clips because they're entertaining, but also to humanize JFK. And it kind of showed through all what he's saying. You should see this persona that he's. Nixon, I can see him ordered things up the car. But JFK, this wasn't like him. He gave the audience. He was a very nice man. He was very easy to protect. He was like Harry Truman. In fact, of all the presidents in history, it seems like they all loved Reagan. Secret Service now. Loved Reagan, loved Truman, and loved JFK. Just for their personality. They were so easygoing. He never interfered with their actions. And that was the thing. And it was all about proximity. So when you get down to it, that's what I alluded to earlier. You left it saying, like, what's the motive for these Secret Service agents to do this? Yeah, that's what I'm left with. It's really tough. On the one hand, you got all this that looks really bad. But I have a hard time on the other hand saying, they wanted Kennedy dead. I don't want to know what to think of it. To this day, I still get people all the time saying, I have a problem with it too, because I see what you're saying. It's hard to, when you got like 30-some agents saying all this, one after another, and they're all corroborated, it's hard to dismiss it as, oh, they're senile, especially when you corroborate with the films and photos showing the agents on the back of the car, and that was normal procedure. So,
we have time for one more question, and then we should cut it off formally, but I'm guessing that, Vince, if others would want to approach you with questions, you'd be willing to entertain.
Yeah.
Do I understand correctly that Boring's still alive and in a nursing home?
Yeah, he's still alive. He's like an invalid, but he's still living in his, like, Temple Hills, Maryland.
Field trip class.
Yeah. Here's the thing. I was born June 25th, 1966. He was born June 25th, 1915. He's from Du Bois, PA. And the ironic thing is history. This is what's so weird about everything. That's why nothing's black and white. He was one of the heroes in the Truman attempt, November of 1950. He was one of the agents that protected Truman from the two Puerto Rican nationalists. That was the conspiracy of two men trying to kill Truman. And ironically, the other agent was Stuart Stott, who was at the trademark waiting for Kennedy. So again, am I saying Floyd Boring is seriously involved? It's like, on one hand, it looks really bad, but it's hard to think, because this guy, in fact, to this day, the law enforcement has a Floyd Boring Award they give out to young students that achieve something in law enforcement. There's several agents that are named. He's actually honored with a Floyd Boring Award.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, he's still alive. He's still, oh, I got to throw this out to you, too. I told you this earlier. A buddy of mine, Dan Roberts, had actually contacted him last year. Now, last time I actually spoke to Floyd Boring, I spoke to him 3 times between 92 and 94. I got a letter from him in 97. Well, he actually spoke to Floyd Boring last year. Now, remember, this is after Floyd Boring adamantly denied that JFK ever did anything. He's a nice man. I got it on audio tape, I got a letter, and everything else. He tells Dan Roberts on the phone, tell a stranger, JFK was responsible for his own death. So there's that gray area. What the heck is that? You're just going against everything you told me, and you say that, and...
Sounds like his Happy Meal lost one of its nuggets.
Yeah.
Last, one more question for yes, please.
Did McNally say how he knew Tom Shipman died?
Oh, good, you knew about that. Yeah, he didn't say, but I investigated that. Tom Shipman was driver of Kennedy's car who died October 14th, 1963. That was one of my little discoveries. It came out in an obscure book by George McNally, The Million Miles of Presidents. And I better give you the short answer first. He died of a heart attack at Camp David. He was 50 years old. He was a Secret Service agent. He was found by Sam Kinney in the cabin. He's the only agent between 1950 and 63 to die, and the next agent to die was in the late 60s. He's the only Kennedy agent to die. He died just a little over a month before Dallas, and he would have been one of 3 candidates to drive Kennedy's car. And I offer this as food for thought in my own book, saying, could you imagine if Bill Greer's ineptitude, and it would have been Tom Shipman? But Tom Shipman, as fate would have it or otherwise, he dies of a heart attack at Camp David the month before. In fact, to this day, at first it was a little tough in the early part of like 2000, 2001 online, do a lot of stuff online, to try to find specifics on how Tom Shipman died. And for years, I couldn't find out after I found this little obscure reference in this book. And by the way, Million Miles of Presidents is not a book you can get in a bookstore. It only came out briefly. He died in 1970, but his widow released the manuscript in 1982, and like rare bookstores have it. But it was just this little nugget. Tom Shipman dies suddenly. Like, what did he die? Oh my God, it's a Kennedy agent. This is amazing. So eventually, what I found out online is there's a little roll call of agents that have passed away from the 19th century up till now. There's only like 37 Secret Service agents that have passed away from like 1865 to 2007. He's one of them. So again, it's just food for thought. Am I saying somebody poisoned him and that's the reason why he didn't drive Kennedy? It just goes to show you that fate or otherwise, isn't it amazing food for thought? If he would have been alive, I wonder if he would have been driving Kennedy in Dallas, and would he have been better than Greer? I think so. Greer was pretty inept, and Greer actually was 54 at the time of Kennedy's death, and again, it's totally denied everything he did. It was terrible. I mean, even people that believe Oswald did it, like Gerald Posner, so the Greer bears responsibility for the assassination. Because again, he looked back twice, disobeyed the order, slowed down the car. So, yeah.
Everyone, thank